Now, if you're going to be working in any type of Microsoft administration services these days, there are some fundamental principles that are very important that you understand. So what I want to do is I want to get into some of the foundations of understanding things like Microsoft domains, understanding some of the networking technologies, RAS and VPNs and virtualization, and also we're going to talk about the cloud services and how all that fits into this. But it's important to kind of start from the beginning so you can understand where things have been, understand where things are going, and you have to consider the fact that the world is transitioning now more into a cloud-oriented environment, but in the past everything was managed on-prem or on-premise, and we got to talk about this transition and how things were and how things are now and where Microsoft is going. So to start with, we go back in time to the 1950s, 1960s. They had mainframes, these gigantic computers that would take up like entire rooms. They used vacuum tubes. And then as we moved into the 1970s, something miraculous happened. They created what was known as an IC, an integrated circuit, which allowed basically binary math to be processed through little chips. And this is where personal computing became popular. So in the 1980s, personal computers started coming out. I'm going to draw this little symbol here to represent a computer. And I tell you what, I'm going to create another little symbol here to kind of represent a bunch of computers. So in the 1980s, companies started buying PCs and personal computers, and they started showing up in people's offices, and eventually, they were networking them together and all of that. And so this is where things really get started. Now, of course, in those days, one of the problems was we lived in what was called a peer-to-peer network. So what would happen is these computers you could network these computers together with various technologies, but there was no centralization, meaning each computer was equal. There was no computer that controls all the other computers. A network admin would have to, if they wanted to make changes, they'd have to sit down at each and every computer to make those changes or get users to help them, which was always a nightmare. And so that didn't, it worked, but it didn't work very efficiently. All right. Now, as we moved into the 1990s, there was a company that was gaining ground called Novell, and they had a product called NetWare, which was the idea of that was to use a server that would help manage machines and also allow people to share files easier. Whereas in a peer-to-peer network back originally, these machines would have to share files with each other and people would have to know each other's passwords. It just didn't work very well. Well, eventually with the creation of the file server concept, you had a more powerful machine that you could share files on and all that. And eventually Novell even came out with the idea of a server that could manage other machines. Now this is kind of where Microsoft comes in. Microsoft created their product called NT, and they created this concept of a domain controller, which is a special type of server that can manage these other servers. Now, fast forward, they came out with what was known as a domain, but fast forward to the year 2000, Microsoft releases their newest domain technology, and they call it Active Directory. And Active Directory domains were represented by a triangle. All right, and a domain controller was a server essentially that had a database on it, and that database was the Active Directory database. So let's just kind of fix that here. This little cylinder looking thing I'm going to make here is going to represent my Active Directory database. So AD. All right, and this is what we still call to this day. We call it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. And usually if you hear that term, Active Directory Domain Services, it means it's an on-premise domain. So anyway, you would always want to have more than one domain controller. The reason you want to have more than one domain controller is because the same reason you have more than one of any type of server, really. One reason being to break up the disbursement of load. These machines will authenticate with these domain controllers, and the more machines you got, you don't want all of that just going to one domain controller, right? The other consideration is redundancy. If you only have one and that server goes down, well, you're in trouble, right? So we want to have multiple. The other thing about domain controllers that are interesting is that they replicate. So, for example, I'm going to make a little smiley face guy here, and this little smiley face guy is going to represent my user. So we create a user account on a domain controller. Now the interesting thing about user accounts, or the interesting thing really about domain controllers, is that they replicate. So everything you do on one will replicate over to the other. So if I create a user account on that first one, well, replication is going to occur between both of them. And so this little arrow thing I'm going to make here is going to represent replication. So domain controllers replicate. That means that this user could log on to any one of these thousands machines, and it's going to, you know, authenticate with the domain controller. All right. The authentication protocol that is used is the protocol known as Kerberos. All right. Kerberos is the authentication protocol. What is a protocol? It's like a language, basically. Okay. Now there was an older protocol that it also supported called NTLM. That was for legacy, for older prior to the year 2000 machines. Now that protocol allowed us to have encrypted passwords and all that, and authenticate securely and all that fun stuff. The other thing is Active Directory uses a language known as the Directory Service Language, and that language was called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Now all that is, again, this is all decades old at this point. At the time when it came out, it was cutting edge, but it is a bit dated nowadays. But it still works, and it's still pretty secure, though there are some considerations on security that I'm not going to explain right now. Now, the other thing that's important about Active Directory is that all machines have to have a name. And the name must be, of course, associated with an IP address and all of that. And so there is a service that we use it on the internet all the time, called DNS, Domain Name Service. Our domain must have a name. Usually when you name your domain, you would name it after your company, and a lot of people even name their domains based on their web presence. So for example, my domain might be called examlabpractice.com. That's my company, my web presence. And I'm going to need to have a server in my domain that can associate the names and IP addresses together. So that server is called a DNS server. DNS, Domain Name System Server. And that server will also have to have a little database on it, and that database will be our DNS database. Okay. So we'll just draw another little cylinder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this, border it with red, and then I'm going to color code the database red, which means that this database, the DNS database, is associated with that name. Now what happens is our machines, clients, domain controllers, we also might even have, let's draw a file server over here. Pretty common that we have file servers in our environment. Okay. All of these machines would register with our DNS. All right. And this allows for the centralization of name resolution, meaning they register their IP addresses into this database, and then now anytime a machine needs to find another machine, it can query DNS. So for example, these machines all have to authenticate by your domain controllers. They can query DNS and say, hey, DNS, do you know what the address is of one of my domain controllers so I can authenticate? And DNS can reply back and say, yeah, here is the information. At that point, the client can go and authenticate. So it works very efficiently. Now, all of this together, this idea of domain controllers, this triangle you see here, this provides centralization. So we moved away from peer-to-peer networking back in the day where, you know, every machine was kind of its own boss and there was no centralized way of managing things, to now we are working in a centralized environment. These domain controllers help us centralize. This DNS service helps us centralize. So we now have some central control over things. One of the great things about our domain controllers too is we have these wonderful things called GPOs, Group Policy Objects. A group policy object is this object that you can create that has all these settings, parameters, any type of attribute you want to configure or change on machines, you can do it through a GPO. So for example, if your boss walks up to you and says, hey, I want you to force the firewalls to be turned on all these machines. I want to make sure that the antivirus is always up to date. I want you to disable some of the wallpaper feature. I don't want people putting crazy wallpapers on their machine. So, I mean, the sky's the limit. There are literally thousands of things you can do inside of a GPO, but what happens is that GPO can instruct these machines to turn things on and turn things off. GPOs also replicate, so when you create a GPO on a domain controller, it replicates over to the other domain controller. So it doesn't matter which machines, authenticate with which domain controller. All right, so these GPOs can be deployed out to these machines, and this is how you turn things on, turn things off. You could even deploy software with that if you wanted to. So it was very, very powerful, a very, very powerful system for managing everything. All right. Of course, let's throw the internet into the mix here. Let's say that this little cloud is going to represent the the internet, and let's talk about a little bit about how that sort of fits into the picture. Let me just clean it up here with the mighty stroke of my paintbrush. I will clean up the internet. All right. All right, so then we have the internet, right? So maybe we've got an internet connection that's coming in here. All right, and of course you don't want to just leave your internal network exposed, so your company would generally have a firewall, right? And we'll just put that firewall right here. And so now we have a secure way for traffic to flow out to the internet, and the only things that can come in would be things that we send out, and we could allow things through that firewall if we want to. Now, this is a traditional domain. This is the way we've done things for 20 years, all right? And in this next little section, I want to talk about expansion on all of this and where things have gone with things like RAS and all that, and VPN and virtualization. So that'll wrap this little section up, and we'll move on to the next. I now want to talk about some concepts that are also sort of the foundation of how we've done things over the years. It's important to understand how we've done things over the years so we can understand how things are now. So looking back, we have an Active Directory domain, ADDS as it's called, Active Directory Domain Services, which uses the LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which uses Kerberos for authentication, or for the legacy back in the 90s devices that used NTLM, New Technology LAN Manager, which isn't all very new these days, but even Kerberos is pretty old considering we've been using it for decades, and I think actually the protocol even came out back in the 1980s. So we got some data technologies, but the technologies have been updated, a lot of them over the years, to be secure, so you can still feel comfortable using those. But let's talk about some different scenarios now. The first thing I want to look at is the scenario of what happens when we have a user who is not at the office. So this person is working from home. Working from home is a lot more popular nowadays than it has been in the past, so it's very common. And this person needs the ability perhaps to be able to connect in and access services that are inside. Okay, and we've got a file server, but ultimately you probably are aware that in the past it was always this mindset of do it yourself, host your own server. So your companies might have a file server, but then they might also have a they might have a SQL database server that users need to access. Let's create that SQL. All right. Maybe Microsoft Exchange. That was email, right? Microsoft Exchange was used for email, and then maybe even like SharePoint was very popular by Microsoft on-premise. So here you've got these these four servers providing a service to our devices, and you've got users working from home and everything else needing to get access to those. Let me just kind of move those a little bit over here, make a little bit of room here, and I'm going to shrink those down just a little bit as well. All right, So this user who is working from home needs to access these services, but the person is not, not around. Well, let me tell you what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't just open up all the ports on the firewall and allow this person in to get access to these devices unsecurely. In fact, in the 90s, a lot of companies did that. The very first company I ever worked for, back in the 90s, they didn't really have a firewall, so you literally could share out you had a public address, and you could connect to it from home. It was really scary when I think about it. Even in the 90s, that was scary, but nowadays it's incredibly scary. Why is it scary? Because you got these people out there that want to do things that they shouldn't do, and get access to companies' data and try to do damage and ransom and all of that, ransomware and all that. And who are these people? Well, we generally call them hackers, right? So let me draw a little hacker. This little box here is going to represent my hacker. All right, and let's make this hacker look like he's up to no good. All right, I'm gonna give him let's give him like a devil horns, some devil horns here. And maybe he's in a bad mood. I'm gonna give him a frowny face, and give him some fangs, and maybe the fangs are dripping blood okay, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, sometimes I get carried away. All right, but anyway, that's gonna be my hacker. All right, goofy looking little hacker person. All right, and so we don't want this hacker spying on my user. We don't want this hacker getting access to resources inside. So how do we get around that? Well, usually the way we would do that is you would use a VPN, a virtual private network. So the way you would do that is you could purchase what was called a VPN concentrator, and basically it's a device that allows secure connections in. But in the Microsoft world, we actually had a type of server we could set up called a RAS server, or also known as an RRAS server because it stood for Routing and Remote Access Services. But anyway, remote access services is the idea here, and with that we have support for VPN. Now what does that do? This allows this thing called a VPN tunnel to be created, which means that you have this encrypted communications that goes through to that RAS server, and then from there that RAS server allows you to access other resources securely. This hacker will not be able to see the traffic that's flowing through because it's all encrypted. The only thing the hacker would be able to see is that it was going up to this firewall, and that would be it. Wouldn't be able to see what the traffic said. So this is how we would definitely help secure things. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about here is what happens when a company needs to have a service that is exposed to the internet. For example, let's say that your company is going to host their own web server, okay? So you set up a web server. All right, maybe this is going to be www.examlabpractice.com or whatever, and people from the internet need to be able to get to it anonymously. Well, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to put that web server? Are you going to put it internally inside the domain like you see here? And the reason that's scary is because you would have to open up port 443, port 80, which is the HTTP ports, to allow traffic to get in, which means not only could somebody out there on the internet anonymously get into this web server, but technically so could a hacker. And if a hacker was ever to gain access over this website by hacking it, then something called pivoting could occur, where a hacker could actually gain access to these other services that are on your network. And so that's where things are really scary. So you definitely won't want to host it internally most of the time, although there was a way to do something called a reverse proxy. I won't get into that right now. But we would probably want to put this outside, right? So we want to put it out here. But there's something else that's a problem on that. If you put it outside that firewall, you don't have to worry about people getting allowing traffic to come in. But the scary thing about that is the fact that this poor web server is now completely exposed to the internet, so with no protection. So the way around that usually is people would get another firewall. So you'd have two firewalls. This first firewall would be called the internal connected firewall, and then this firewall here would be called the external connected firewall. Now this little network between that, we would call that a DMZ, demilitarized zone, or now the more popular term is perimeter network. Okay, so DMZ, perimeter network are basically the same thing. All right, and so now what you would do is you'd only open the ports like port 80, 443, 53 for DNS if you put DNS in there, whatever ports there that you need, and now traffic would be able to get to this web server. Okay, and so even if a hacker somehow hacks this web server, you're not going to allow traffic to pass through this firewall and get to these resources. The only traffic that you might allow would be VPN. Okay, and there's a bunch of authentication and all that has to happen to make that work. All right, so that's the idea of remote access and VPNs in a nutshell for you, as well as the concept of DMZ and the perimeter network idea. Now, the final thing I want to look at with you in this video is the idea of virtualization. So I talked about how in the past it was always the mindset was we got to host everything ourselves. We got to have our own little data center. We got to have our we got to have our own servers, file server, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, all that, and it's all got to be hosted by us. And that's the way things have always been done. All right. Now, then what you'll find is as time went on, a company called VMware came out with a way of expanding on virtualization. Just so you know, virtualization is not a new term. Virtualization has been around for a very long time. In fact, the term hypervisor is essentially the software that lets us emulate hardware. And if you can emulate hardware, you can also store software on that emulated hardware. That's the idea of virtualization. That term hypervisor has been around since the 1970s. The idea of even mainframes dividing up processing time and doing shared computing was a form of virtualization. So this is not a new concept, but VMware, they expanded on this idea, and the thing that they did that really pushed the envelope on all this was that, hey, you don't necessarily need 4 different servers. And here's the other thing. Here's the other crazy thing. If you wanted redundancy for those 4 servers, you'd really need 8 servers, right? You could do clustering those together. So you'd have 8 servers to provide redundancy for those. But with virtualization, I can set up a hypervisor server, 1 server, and virtualize those other servers. Now, in the Microsoft world, we call that Hyper-V. That is the software that does this, Hyper-V, hypervisor. Microsoft's not the one that came up with that. VMware is not the first to ever come up with that. VMware was the biggest contributor to this concept, though, so I do have to give them credit where credit is due. All right, now the other beautiful thing, though, about this is you get a really, really powerful machine. You virtualize your machines on those. You get these things called checkpoints in Microsoft. They used to be called snapshots, and a lot of other companies still call them snapshots, where you can make changes without the worry of breaking anything because you can revert back to before the change was made. The other thing that's wonderful about using virtualization is if I want to have complete redundancy, I don't have to have 8 servers. I could literally, purchase another server and have a copy of the virtual machines on that other server. Now I've only got 2 servers as opposed to having to have a total of 8 servers. Okay, so this is a very powerful feature capability that kind of started everything. Another thing that we got, and this is kind of where you start thinking about cloud computing, is with virtualization comes the term elasticity, which basically means that each of these machines can be given a certain amount of RAM processing power, but here's what's interesting about that. If one of the servers isn't using all of the available RAM that it's been given, it can share it with other servers. So for example, this file server has been given more RAM than it needs, and then SQL needs that RAM. The file server can give up some of that RAM over to SQL, and when SQL's done using that extra memory, it can release it back to everybody. It's basically a pool type scenario where it gets released into a pool of RAM and pool of CPU, and they can grow and shrink as they need. And that's a small way of sort of on-premise way of looking at elasticity. Of course, when you get into cloud computing, you'll learn that can expand across multiple machines across the board in these big data centers. But not to get into that just yet here. But that's the idea. Hopefully that now helps you with understanding that concept of what virtualization is. And with that is really where, cloud computing started to come into play, which I'm not explaining in this video. But hopefully now you have a much better understanding of the concept of the RAS, VPN, as well the DMZ concepts and virtualization. And now in this next section, we'll start getting into the concept of cloud services. So with the creation of virtualization, it got companies thinking. Companies like Amazon and Google and Intel and IBM and eventually even Microsoft that, hey, we've got these massive data centers. Why not allow people to pay us to host their virtual machines on our data center? So in other words, we can get people to pay us money to host their virtual machines, and they don't have to deal with all the headaches of dealing with everything on premise. So this is really the idea of where cloud services came from. And so I'm going to draw this kind of big cloud here. This is going to represent cloud computing, if you will, and we'll have a connection coming down here, okay? And I will just kind of clean that up a little bit, make it somewhat look nice. So this being, the big thing is this is not a new concept of, if you think about humans as a whole, we have offered services for years. I know how to change the oil in my car, but I don't necessarily enjoy doing it. So I can pay a mechanic shop the fee, and they will do it for me as a service, right? Well, this is the idea of cloud services. So there's some acronyms I want to introduce you to. The first one being the term IaaS, and that is infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service means the cloud provider is offering their infrastructure for a fee as a service, okay? So the idea being something like this: instead of me having to host my virtual machines and all that in my on-premise environment, I can pay this cloud company to host virtual machines for me. They can also host a virtual network for you. They can host, they can have storage that's offered to you. They can have firewalls, virtual firewalls that are associated on those virtual networks, and virtual load balancers. Okay, they can have apps out there that are available. They can have virtual databases that are hosted in the cloud. So essentially just about anything you could imagine that you can host on premise can be hosted out there in the cloud service. Now, Amazon, Google, IBM, Intel, Microsoft, these various companies offer this Microsoft's cloud service that does this. Their IaaS service is called Azure. Now, let me just kind of clarify. You may pronounce that name, that word, a little different than I do, Azure or Azure or Azure. Actually, years ago when I was first learning Azure, I actually went to the internet and started watching videos of the developers that created Azure, and the first few developers that I watched, that's how they pronounced it. They pronounced it Azure. So that's how I just assumed that it needed to be pronounced. Of course, I learned later down the road that not all the developers even agree on how to pronounce that word. Some of them pronounced it Azure, Azure, Azure. I've even heard somebody pronounce it Azure. So this is one of those tomato, pronounce that word any way you want to pronounce it. That's how I say it, which is Azure. Okay. So Azure is Microsoft's official infrastructure as a service. And the way that it all works is you pay a fee for what you use every month. Basically, how much CPU, memory, storage, network, all of that you use, that's what you're going to pay for. Okay. Now, there are some other terms, other acronyms that I want to introduce you to. There is an acronym called PaaS, which stands for Platform as a Service, and an acronym called SaaS, which is Software as a Service. Now, the idea there being that there are, well, we'll start with Software as a Service first. software as a service, the idea is that there is a fully functional app or application that is 100% ready for you to start using, or your users to start using. All you got to do is just jump right in and start using it. Okay, so there are some Azure services that are software as a service. There's also what are called platforms as a service. Now, platform as a service is kind of there's a little bit more work involved from an admin standpoint. So a platform as a service means there is some type of software platform that is available for you to start using, and it's 100% ready for you to use, but you have to go and administer it and use it before it's going to really do anything. A good example of this is Microsoft's directory services in the cloud is called Intra ID. Intra ID. All right. Which I want to make, it's very important that you realize that this was formerly called Azure AD, and there's still a lot of documentation out there that refers to this as Azure AD. So it's very important that that you are aware of that. Now, you are taking my course right now, and you should realize that I have hundreds of hours of videos that that I've got to update that involve that term Azure AD. There are literally hundreds of hours that I have recorded using the term Azure AD, and I'm in the process of updating videos, but be aware that I don't have them all upgraded. So you may hear me refer in the course to stuff as Azure AD. I actually have a video on this for you to watch after these foundation videos. It's a video that says do not skip. So please do not skip that video. Make sure you watch that video because it's going to talk about this name change. So anyway, the name is now Intra ID. It's just a name change. They've changed it to Azure AD. The services are pretty much all the same. It's just a name change. Okay, so Intra ID is a platform as a service. Now, it is Microsoft's directory services. This is where your user accounts and passwords and groups and permissions, role permissions, and all that are all managed through Intra ID, formerly Azure AD. Okay, whereas on-premise in a domain, we called it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. All right, and I think that's part of the reason Microsoft changed the name, to kind of distinguish the difference between the on-premise Active Directory and the former Active Directory, Azure AD, to Intra ID. Anyway, this platform as a service is ready for you to use, but there's only like one user, and that's the admin, and then you're responsible for going in there as an admin and adding users and controlling things. That's why it's a platform as a service. It's not 100% ready, set up. You have to administer it. Now, Microsoft's main platform as a service functions and software as a service, they have something called Microsoft 365. So there's really two parts to the Microsoft Cloud Service. There's Azure, which is mostly focused on the IaaS side of things. And don't get me wrong, in Azure there are also some platform as a services and software as a services, but it's mostly geared towards IaaS. Whereas Microsoft 365 is mostly geared towards platform as a service. Now, these two are very related. Microsoft 365 sits on top of Azure. You can't have Microsoft 365 without Azure. And if you create an Azure account, then it'll allow you to automatically create a Microsoft 365 account. So these are all related. You're not just going to create an Azure account or not just going to create a Microsoft 365 account. They're pretty much linked together. Okay. Now, in the Microsoft 365 services, you have lots of platform as a services and software as a service. For example, we have what are called the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, which that was formerly called Office 365, and that's the downloadable version of the Microsoft 365 apps, formerly the Office 365 apps like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of that. And there is also something called Office for the Web. Now that is fully a software as a service. The Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, that is actually a mix. It's a platform as a service and a software as a service. Most people refer to it as a software as a service because they're downloadable apps. But as an admin, from an admin standpoint, we have to administer that. So the administration side of it is platform as a service. Office for the Web is 100% software as a service. These are web-based versions of the Office apps that are ready for your users to use. Once they get a license, they can use it. Okay, then we have Exchange Online. Okay, so the administration side of that is a platform as a service, but the user side of that is a software as a service, right? And then we've got SharePoint Online, which is the same idea. It's a, admin side is a platform as a service, but the user side, which is what most everybody focuses on, is a software as a service. We have Microsoft Teams, same thing for that. Okay, for messaging and all of that fun stuff. We have a product called Intune, which is an incredibly powerful product. Mobile device management, mobile application management. Intune is what is sort of taking the place of GPOs in the cloud. So on premise, we could control the settings and parameters and attributes, and we could deploy software and all that using GPOs on premise. Well, now when it comes to the cloud service, we can use Intune. We can actually control on-premise machines from Intune. So it is very, very powerful, an incredibly powerful product. Then we've got OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business is a cloud-based storage that users can have access to. So anyway, there's actually so many products that are cloud-based products. There's no way I could put them all in here, but here's some of the main things. Now, as far as the licensing and all of that, with Azure, you are paying for what you use, CPU, RAM, storage, and network. But for the Microsoft 365 services, you have what are called subscriptions, and you purchase a subscription with a certain amount of licenses. So, for example, if I purchase a Microsoft 365 subscription, I can purchase a certain amount of licenses, and I can issue those out to my users, and I will pay a monthly fee for however many licenses that I've got with my subscription. Okay, and that's just giving you a basic understanding of how that works exactly. Okay, so ultimately, though, if I could kind of color code this, we'll say that the Azure side of this, IaaS, and again, Azure does have some platform as a service stuff as well as software as a service, but it's mostly geared to be a infrastructure as a service. And then the Microsoft 365 is mostly platform as a service, software as a service. So if I was to kind of draw a, kind of just draw around these, we would say that these right here are all geared towards Microsoft 365, and then these are geared towards the infrastructure service, which is Azure. And both of these, Azure and Microsoft 365, they share intra ID. They share intra ID. Okay, yellow or red and blue make purple, right? Okay, so they actually you create users in the Azure side or the Microsoft 365 side. You're going to see the same users because they are linked together. They share the same directory service, so it's important to understand that. Now, the other piece of this is, what about situations where you want to link all this together? So it's not uncommon nowadays for companies, to have this triangle, to have this on-premise domain, and then also start utilizing Microsoft's cloud services. And then, for years and years, they've always pushed this thing called SSO. SSO is single sign-on, where you have a user has a user account, and that user account gives them access to everything they need. Well, we don't get SSO if you have to have a user account to access things in your domain and then a different user to access things in the cloud, right? Well, Microsoft has ways around that. They actually have services that you can use for linking these together. And that service, let me just kind of move some of this around a little bit so I can make a little bit more room. We'll put the DNS server there. We'll move this little RAS server down over here. And the server is called Microsoft Intra Connect. And it was formerly Azure AD Connect. Okay. So again, it's called Intra Connect now, and it used to be called Azure AD Connect. And I like to refer to it with the old name as well, just because, be advised, you really kind of need to know the old name as well, because there's still a lot of documentation that will refer to this as the older name. The newer name is Intra Connect. The older name is Azure AD Connect. But this was a server you could set up on premise, and what it would do is it'll synchronize your user accounts out to the cloud. So your on-premise user accounts would get synchronized. So whatever users you have on-premise, and you don't have to synchronize them all, you could pick and choose which one you synchronize, but your user accounts are going to sync out to intra-ID. And now what will happen is you have this thing called seamless SSO, where when your users log on to the domain, it logs them on in both places. They log on to the on-premise domain as well as in the cloud, which is really, really cool. Now that is a heavier weight version. There is actually a lighter weight version that's a very, very lightweight application. You don't actually have to dedicate a server to it like they kind of want you to with Connect. There is actually another lighter weight tool called IntraSync or Intra-ID Sync, which is a lighter weight. Now there's some pluses and minuses to go in either route, which I'm not going to get into right now. But the traditional way to do this was to use this here, IntraConnect, formerly Azure AD Connect. Now the other thing I'll tell you is this does not sync back. So it would sync users out, but it won't sync users that are created out in the cloud back to on-premise. You cannot currently do that. You can't synchronize users that are created in Intra-ID down here. But any users can be synced out, and it'll even make it where if they change their password, like out in the cloud, it'll sync that as well. So anyway, that kind of gives you a rundown of that. Now, I'll also tell you that Microsoft is moving away from domains. In fact, if you got an on-premise domain like what you see here, then yeah, it's a great idea to utilize this. But if you're a new company, and this really pains me to say it because I have fed my family for over 2 decades by not only teaching about Active Directory on-premise, but also implementing Active Directory on-premise as a consultant. And so it kind of pains me to say this, but as a consultant now, I'm not even recommending that newer companies implement a domain anymore. A lot of companies are now moving to the cloud, and there's ups and downs of that. But to be honest with you, in most cases, your company gets out cheaper by utilizing cloud services. Okay. And so nowadays you can actually set up on-premise machines and manage them through Intune and things like that are in the cloud. You can even have client machines hosted in the cloud, but I'm not going to dive into that right now. Ultimately, though, if you are a company that's been around for a while, then the traditional approach that you see here, where you've got a domain, and then you're starting to move into the cloud, you can set up IntraConnect, formerly Azure AD Connect, or Intra-ID Sync, which is the lighter weight version, and you can have things synchronized out to the cloud. All right. Well, hopefully these foundation videos have been instructional to you. I hope you got a lot out of this, and you're ready to move on.
I'd like to spend some time now talking about some pretty important concepts in your Azure and Microsoft 365 environment. So if you're going to look at the ideas of designing your environments to secure things and lock things down through like a zero trust based system, there are some fundamental principles you're going to want to know. The first thing we want to look at here is the idea of having a business resiliency goal, or multiple business resiliency goals ultimately. And so there's 5 critical things to think about here. First being high availability. We want to make sure that whatever services that we're using in Azure and Microsoft 365 is going to have high availability. Okay. The good news is, for the most part, Microsoft provides us with high availability themselves by having multiple regions. In these regions, Microsoft has, I think, close to 70 regions or something like that now. That's different places in the world where they have data centers. And these data centers are usually made up of at least 3 different zones, which are usually 3 different buildings that have their own electricity, air conditioning, and failover capabilities built right into them. So from a high availability standpoint, Microsoft provides that, but keep in mind, not all of it's free. So when we implement Azure resources, for example, we need to consider probably paying for the extra availability features that are available through Azure. All right. The next is disaster recovery. So when we think about disaster recovery here, we want to be concerned about making sure that we understand that different incidents can occur. This could be incidents that occur by hackers trying to get in and do things and cause disasters, but also accidents. And accidents can lead to downtime and data loss. So we want to have strategies in place for that. We want to have backups. We want to have replication procedures. We want to have some type of recovery process in place that will help us in dealing with various disasters, right? All right. So when we think about high availability being important, obviously, and then disaster recovery is another thing that is critically important. Then we have data durability, right? So the idea there being ensuring that data is not lost or corrupted over time, making sure that Azure is going to supply us with the proper services and solutions that it's going to provide durability. And part of this is things like geo-redundant storage, meaning that our storage can be dispersed, multiple copies of it can be dispersed in different locations. So that is a big part of data durability. Then we've got the operational responsiveness. So how quick can detection and all of that occur? And so there are various features and capabilities. For example, Microsoft Defender, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Azure Monitor. There are various health services that are actively monitoring and making sure that things are still intact and that the integrity of your data has not been compromised. And then last thing under business resiliency goals is compliance and security. A big part of a lot of our industries nowadays is meeting certain compliancy. Depending upon where you're at in the world, what country you're in, you might have different compliance laws versus others. These are regulatory standards and things like that our data and applications have to adhere to. So we have to have a system in place that can deal with that. Like with Microsoft Defender, we have Microsoft Purview and all of that in the Microsoft Azure and 365 side of things. All right. So that is something to think about as well and have systems in place for that. The next thing I want to look at with you is identifying and prioritizing threats. So this gets into, if you're considering the various types of threats, we need to identify what those threats are and then triage or prioritize. So the first thing mentioned here is risk assessments. So you have to have the ability to perform risk assessments, and that's where we actually assess our existing environment and we think about if our existing environment meets the level of security that it needs to, both internally and externally. Whether you're talking about cloud services, whether you're talking about software vulnerabilities or the actual hardware, network, and even the people that work for our organization. Because, humans make mistakes. We have human errors. And then another thing is natural disaster. Now, if you're hosting everything in the cloud, Microsoft mostly has you covered there with all of their redundancy. But you do have to consider making sure you are paying for everything that's needed there. So that is the idea of a risk assessment. The next is threat modeling. So with threat modeling, the idea is to systematically identify what security threats and vulnerabilities are out there, and then also know how those could impact your business operations, and decide, okay, what exact threats do we have to worry about? How is it going to impact? And that's going to help us prioritize by knowing what threats are out there and then how they could impact our business. That is called threat modeling, all right? The next is the criticality analysis. Criticality analysis, the idea is to think, to look in terms of not everything is equal. In other words, certain business operations prioritize over other business operations, and certain services and data should be prioritized over other types of services and data. So we have to consider that. We have to think about, what a business can be impacted. For example, I provided IT support for brick and mortar stores before, and these brick and mortar stores have a website, and they barely sell any of their inventory off the website. Everything is mostly through the brick and mortar place, meaning people come in and buy stuff, through the store. But I've also seen businesses where 99% of their sales are through the website. So you would want to consider, if I'm talking about the one that 99% of the sales are happening through the website, I need to prioritize the web services. That's their major selling point. But if I'm talking about the brick and mortar stores and there are devices in there, point of sales devices that have to be up and running in order for sales to occur, and the back end of that has to be up and running, maybe I don't prioritize the website, I prioritize that. That's just an example, but that is criticality analysis, analyzing what's got to be up and prioritizing that. The next is compliance requirements. Again, this goes hand in hand, the regulatory standards and all of that I mentioned earlier. That's going to play a part in this as well. In some cases, you have to prioritize certain things depending upon the industry you're in. Maybe you're in the health environment, the medical world, that's HIPAA, or payment card industry where you have PCI DSS and things like that. That's something that you have to consider. And then finally, we have continuous monitoring analysis. That is all about having good security posture. Security posture is something that you can't just implement one time and think that you're secure. You have to stay on top of that. You have to keep at it. Again, I like to use various analogies for this, but if you were a boxer and you are the best boxer on the planet right now and you've won the highest ranked title you can get, and then all of a sudden you stop boxing for the next 20 years, does that mean that you are still going to be the best boxer in 20 years? Or even if you just stop boxing for 1 year, do you think you'll be the best boxer that ever lived after 1 year of not, putting the gloves on and getting in the ring? Probably not. That's all about posture. Posture is something you have to maintain, you have to stay on top of, you have to continuously stay on top of your security and update things and monitor the health of things if you want to be secure. So that is what continuous monitoring analysis is about. This is all about making sure we're on top of everything. All right. Well, hopefully that now gives you a better understanding of the concepts when it comes to business resiliency goals as well as identifying and prioritizing threats. I'd now like to talk to you about a few different topics. We're going to discuss a little bit involving dealing with ransomware in the Microsoft environment, as well as some of the best practices there, backing up and restoring. We're going to talk about privileged access. We're not doing a deep dive into this right in this video. We're kind of doing a high-level overview. We want to make sure we understand some concepts before we dig deeper, all right? So first thing, let's just talk about what ransomware is. Now, if you're not familiar with ransomware, we actually go out there and do just a Google search in images with ransomware. There's various screenshots and things like that of these that show up. Here's one of the popular ones back in the day. It was called WannaCry years ago. And the idea of ransomware is generally somebody gets tricked into installing something, usually through a Trojan of some kind, or what they call a Trojan horse. This could come through email, it could be put on a flash drive, it could be sent to you as a file attachment through something like Teams or some other chat program. You could go to a website and open and execute a file. There's so many different ways that this could get installed on your machine. But the idea most of the time with ransomware is this ransomware software is going to go and it's going to use a encryption key to encrypt all the files on your hard drive. Well, every file that it can encrypt on your hard drive, usually. It's going to usually target your documents, your images, videos, audio files, things like that. And it'll make it where you can't open those files without paying a ransom. Okay, so in the case of WannaCry, for example, you would get, when you try to open up a file, you'd get a message to say, oops, your files have been encrypted. I love how it says oops, like it's an accident or something. Ultimately, they would want you to pay some money or like a Bitcoin or something like that to these hackers, and at that point, you could decrypt your files. Hopefully, they would give you the key, and you would be able to decrypt your files, all right? If you go actually and do a Google or Bing search right now on, if you search these keywords, ransomware protection in Azure, you'll find an article labeled that. You can click on it, and this is what it looks like. It talks about what the idea of ransomware is, how it's a growing threat, and it's definitely something that's happening to a lot of different businesses out there. The idea is to target your various assets, as I was mentioning. Why does this succeed? Well, a lot of the reasons why ransomware succeed, most of the time it's just being vulnerable because users make mistakes. It's usually through social engineering that it'll occur, but users will go through and install things, and a lot of organizations give admin rights. So this is where privileged access comes in. Privileged access involves the fact that you have people in a privileged position that have the authority to install things in their environment. And a lot of times what happens is because users complain to admins about not having the rights on their machine, a lot of admins will make users administrators on their local machines. And the next thing you know, they're getting ransomware installed on their machines. And it could even spread to other devices on the network. So you run into this a lot, actually. I've dealt with it in my clients before as a consultant, and it's not fun to deal with. And I'll tell you, really, one of the best ways to prepare for a ransomware attack, besides getting into privileged access and cutting everybody's authority and all of that, but one of the best ways to prepare against it is back up your data, back up and restore. So you want to cut people's privileges and you want to back up and restore, and that's going to really try to help you prepare. If you click on this little prepare for a ransomware attack, it talks about following the cybersecurity frameworks, adopt a cybersecurity framework, which is a set of best practices, implement something like Microsoft Defender for Cloud, prioritize mitigation. In other words, mitigation is trying to lessen the impacts or the effects of something. And again, backing up and restoring. I'll give you a great example. I was a consultant for a company, and they were actually a graphics arts company. And they managed to get ransomware on their server, and all of the data on their server was encrypted. And they contacted me. They didn't know what was going on at first. They contacted me, and so when I looked at their server, it was everything was encrypted. But here's the good news: we had a really good backup system at that company. Everything was backed up every single day. All the data that was changed was backed up every single day. So they really didn't lose any data because they were able to do a restore. They were able just to wipe all that data off the drive. They restored all their data from backup to the day before the ransom, because the ransomware happened in the morning on a certain day. They just did a restore from the previous day, and boom, everything was back up and running. So you can mitigate by doing that. Mitigate is lessen the impact. Of course, if you're not doing daily backups like they are, it can be a little harder. But there are systems in place like that. Like Azure, we have Azure Backup, right? Microsoft has Azure Backup. They have a whole entire backup center. And again, I'm not diving deep into this in this video. I just want to introduce you to it if you're not familiar with it. But Azure Backup can back up virtual machines. You can get into backing up physical machines. They've got what's called site-to-site backup in Azure, where you can actually back up entire on-premise sites with this system. Okay. Now, the other thing to understand is there's lots of tools and all that available to us as well for trying to protect against ransomware. Number one, when the Azure world, we have, if I go to all services here, I have what is called Defender for Cloud. And Defender for Cloud can help link and monitor all the various devices I have in regards to Azure and all that. And it can also link to on-premise environments and monitor those devices as well. Now, the great news about this too is that can all be linked in regards to Microsoft Sentinel, which is Microsoft's SIEM and SOAR based product as well. Again, not diving deep into that in this video, but you can basically pull information and have these services monitor all of this. Now, again, Defender for Cloud is great monitoring the VMs and on-premise services, but we've also got Microsoft Defender XDR, which is formerly known as Microsoft Defender, just Microsoft Defender. But if I actually go to portal.microsoft.com, I can click Show All, click this security blade. Slowly but surely, here it is. This is Microsoft Defender XDR. All right. And the idea here is it provides this zero trust environment. Again, not diving deep into zero trust, but the idea is to provide extended detection and response. That's what XDR is. And so this is a system that doesn't get into the monitoring of your virtual machines and all that. It's about monitoring all your documents. This in Microsoft 365 monitors all your applications, and this is going to also help protect things. So the main thing you want to remember here is there, you want to know the idea of ransomware. You want to make sure stuff is backed up. You have a backup and restoration strategy put in place. You want to use the tools that are available. And again, we're not diving deep into those tools in this video, but you want to be aware of those tools and you want to learn how to implement those tools. And of course, that's exactly where you want to go with this. All right. But hopefully that gives you a better idea now of the concept of what ransomware is, and then the fact that we do have some extremely powerful tools that are going to help us fight ransomware. Now, obviously, one of the important best practices that we've got in our environments from a design perspective that we need to be thinking about would be backups. And with Azure, we do have quite a few solutions in regards to making sure things are backed up. If you actually go out and do a Google or Bing search on the keywords overview of Azure Backup, you'll see this article that you can click on right here. And it gets into the various things that you can deal with when it comes to backing up. Number one, with Azure Backup, we can back up on-premise data. In fact, there's a couple of ways to do that. There is an agent you can install called the Mars agent, which can be installed on your client machines or servers, and it'll just back up one machine at a time. Doing that individually, you can have it be backed up into Azure. So it's a little piece of software that you can install. Now, another way would be to use what's called MABS. MABS is the Microsoft Azure Backup Server. And this is where you'd actually set up an actual server in your environment that would be dedicated to backing up files. And so I tell you this will back up VMware as well as Hyper-V, virtual machines as well. Then you got just Azure VMs have a backup directly with Azure using Azure Backup. You can have disk backed up through Azure, Azure File Share, so storage accounts, SQL, SAP, Azure Databases, Azure Blob Storage, Database, Kubernetes. So, pretty much the majority of the things that we deal with in Azure can all be backed up with the help of Azure Backup. So it is a enterprise-based solution for keeping things backed up. They even mention how the storage side of all this is very, very redundant. Meaning that depending on which storage option you go with, you can have multiple copies of your backup stored all over the world. Of course, that does cost more money. Not to dive into all of this right now, but that's sort of the idea. It also, of course, helps protect against ransomware. Okay, looking at this little image here a little bigger, you can see right here their backup service. The goal is to provide all of the things you see here, whether your data is stored on premise or whether it's in the cloud. All right. Now, if I go back over to portal.azure.com and I click the menu button, go to all services, I can just search for the keyword backup, and you'll see the backup center. This is sort of like your one-stop shop for all your backup needs, if you will, in Azure. Of course, we don't really have anything to back up, so if we wanted to create something to back up, we very well easily could. Let's just, for demonstration purposes, we'll go to the menu button here, and we'll go to all services, and we'll just search for storage. And let's say we want to create a storage account. Now, again, this is not I'm not a video where I'm diving deep into storage accounts. All I want to say is that storage accounts are where we can store files and what is called blobs, binary large objects, which is just basically binary data. And SQL information, all that, NoSQL, all can be stored inside of a storage account. So it's a resource for storing information. I can click Create. All right. And I'm going to go to this, create a new resource group. That's a container. And we'll just call this Backup Demo RG. That's going to be the name of my little resource group. And my storage account has to have a unique name. I'm going to call this Backup Demo Storage ELP for Exam Lab Practice. That'll just be it's got to be a unique name, globally unique, meaning you can't have other tenants out there that are using the same name. not getting into the intricacies of what all this stuff is in this video. The point is just to quickly create a storage account. All right, so we're just going to go right here and click Review and Create. And it's going to validate it, and I'm going to click to create. Now, while that is getting created, I'm also going to add a virtual machine for the fun of that. So I'll click the menu button, go down here to, let's see, virtual machines. If you don't see that, you can always click the menu button, go to all services, and search virtual machines. So we'll click create. All right, we're going to just create a quick virtual machine. We'll store that in our backup demo RG container. Again, you may not see the same resource groups as me. That's the only one I care about if you're doing this with me. In my VM, I'm just going to call this VM to backup, all right, for lack of a better name. East US will be my region, no infrastructure required. For redundancy, I'll just do a Windows Server 2022 data center, that's fine. I'm just going to go with the default standards right here. For disks, I'm going to change the disk type to standard HDD. Please be advised that these screens change all the time, so your screen might look different than mine. It's not the end of the world. It's just something you got to get used to. In the world we live in today, screens are going to change. Concepts should somewhat remain the same, though. I'm going to click Next. Next, over to Management. I am going to do Auto Shutdown, just in case I forget to delete this. It will delete it for me, or it will shut it down and not use up Azure credit. I'm on Eastern Time, so I'm going to do that. Then we're going to click Next on Monitoring. I'm going to disable Boot Diagnostics. I don't need that. I'm going to click Review and Create. And then, oh, I left something off. Let's see what I left. Oh, I left off the password information. So, yeah. So let's go right here. We'll change this to, I'm going to say ELP admin is my username. And I'll put a password in. All right. Now we'll click Review and Create. And we're going to click to create. All right. So meanwhile, let's jump over to our storage account. If I click the menu button and go to All Services, we'll just search for Storage. Click on Storage Accounts, and I have this storage account right here. All right. And let's say I have something I want to store in it. So I'm going to go here to File Shares. Maybe I want to store a something in a file share. All right. So I could do that. And so I'll just go here and I'll create a file share. I'm going to call this file share Images, because maybe I want to store some images in it. Oh, got to make sure I don't have any uppercase characters in there. All right. And then I can click Next. Now, I've got a backup option right here for backing up. If I want to set up a backup policy for my images, I can do that here. So that's the first thing to be aware of when it comes to backups, is that you can set up a backup policy and you can have it schedule backups. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can always come back and do this later. All right. If I enable backup, it's going to create this thing called a Recovery Services Vault, which is going to be like a backup vault. I'll just call it that, backup vault. All right, that's fine. It can do this daily if we want. I'm going to click Review and Create, and we're going to click to create. So we've now created a little file share to store files, and it's got a backup schedule on it. And now, if I want, I could upload a file to that backup vault. So I'm just going to upload a drawing. All right, so I just uploaded a image, and this is just an image based on my little YouTube channel. So I'm going to click Upload, and there we go. So that is officially done. And so now I've got that upload. So I just click Browse. There it is right there. There's you can see the, if I want to download the image, there's a picture of what the image looked like. And so there's the file. All right. And I can click Backup, as you can see right here. My backup vault. I've got an existing backup vault. I want to just go ahead and enable a backup for this image. If maybe I want to do backup, I could trigger, I could schedule set up a new one if I wanted, or I could select my existing backup policy, right? So at that point, we've initialized we're confirming that's gonna, that's part of it. Now it will be backed up because it's part of that. It's part of the container that I stored it in, the images share, the file share. So let's go back over here real quick to storage, backup, or my storage account. Back over to your file share. All right, we have that file share right there. Go over to backup, and as you can see, this is still all in place. We're using our existing backup policy. If we wanted to create a new backup policy for it, we can. But you can see when it's going to occur. You can also see when the retention period is going to be. All right. Now I want to take a look at, if we go over to our virtual machine, click the menu button. I'm going to go over to virtual machines. Okay. I'm going to click VM to backup. This little VM that I've got. Now, if we go down here, click on backup. All right. So I can say, okay, I want to create a new backup. I have the backup vault. And then you can do, there's different policies. In this case, enhanced, an enhanced backup, multiple backups per day up to 30. This is in Azure. You'll see that I don't have standard as an option here, be an Azure VM. Multiple backups per day up to 30. Okay. And supports trusted launch Azure VM. So anyway, you've got these different options, and you can set your frequency, do a full backup in this case. Now, if I want, I can edit this policy. If I click edit this policy, you'll notice it'll let me change the frequency. So I can do that very easily if I want. And I can have it set the retention period too for how long it's going to retain it. Okay. So you have all of that control. Now all I got to do is just go right here and click to enable this backup. And it's going to go through that process. Now if we come over here to the menu button and go to all services, and we do a search for just the keyword backup, we're going to click on Backup Center. All right. And then from there, you will be able to see as backup jobs start happening when the schedule and all. So this one's in process right now, or in progress right now with my VM to backup. My image that is in my storage account, that one is not, the schedule hasn't hit yet, but this one I triggered. So point is, through the Backup Center, you're going to be able to see all backups that are occurring. Okay. So that's one of the things to consider here. Remember, the Backup Center in Azure Backup is mainly just like, hey, everything involving backups are going to be managed here. You also, in Azure, when it comes to VMs, you have what is called a snapshot. You can create a snapshot, which is just a backup of a virtual disk. So I can click to create a snapshot, and that's going to do what's called a point-in-time backup of that disk. So it'll back up the disk as the way it is right now, and you can do what's called incremental, which is save on the storage cost by making a partial copy of the disk based on the difference between the last snapshot. So if you already created a previous snapshot and you want to create a new snapshot, it's just going to back up the changes onto that disk. Or and that essentially saves costs, because as long as you've got your original disk and you're just doing a incremental, let's say the original disk has, I don't know, 150 gigs of data on it, and so you've got that, and then you do an incremental. The incremental disk would just save anything new, and if you needed to revert back to that original disk, you can just revert back to that original disk if you want. And then you have what's called a full copy, which is obviously real simple. That's just, hey, back up the entire disk. It's going to get more expensive to do that if you're doing that with every virtual machine disk. Okay, but anyway, that's another option as opposed to, backing up the entire VM and everything, involving that. You can just back up the disk as well. The main thing to get across here, though, is that your backup center is where everything is going to be stored. So if I go to Azure Backup right here, click on Backup Center. If I search Azure Backup, I should say, go to Backup Center. This is where everything's going to be. And then also you can trigger a backup if you want from here as well. So you can choose what you want to back up. Okay. You can select a vault, right? If I was dealing with this, I've already got a vault set up. Okay. In this case, multiple, because I've had a different one for my virtual machine. And then also when it comes to restore, you can do restore here as well. So you can restore. Now my backup virtual machine is not done. It's not complete yet, so I don't have a restore option for that. But again, ultimately this is where all of that stuff is going to be managed. And hopefully that now gives you a better understanding of our backup options in regard to Azure. Now the only other thing we want to do is we want to delete our resource group, so it's not using up any of our resources. So you can go to resource groups, or if you're like on your virtual machine or something like I am here, I can just click my resource group and we're going to try to delete it. Now I'm going to warn you, there'll be an error, and we'll read what that error says. So we're going to go delete resource group. We're going to copy the resource group name, apply it, and then hit delete. Okay, now it's going to throw an error. Let's read what the error says. It's going to put a lock on our storage account because of the backup vault that's in place. So we're just going to delete that lock. And now if we go back, let's try deleting the resource group. Paste that in, delete, and it should start going through successfully now. And the reason we're doing this is because we don't want to be using up our Azure credits, and I'm not really diving into the intricacies of these different services right now. I just wanted to put those in there just to have something I could demonstrate performing a backup with. And after saying that, I realized there was one more issue. When you go through and delete the resources, the backup vault will still be there. And let's go into the backup vault and let's try and delete it. And when you go to delete it, this was the part I had forgotten about when I was going through the process, is there are a few things that have to happen before it will successfully allow you to delete it. So we're going to go through and perform those steps now. Okay, first thing it mentions is just having permissions with multi-factor authentication. I don't need to do anything there. Disable soft delete. So if I go to settings right here, we're going to click disable on the soft delete. We're going to click save, and that is done. All right. And then for backup items, let's go to backup items and look and see. Okay, so we have this Azure storage, Azure files. All right. I had triggered it earlier when I was playing around to stop it, but I'm going to hit stop backup. All right. I'm just going to hit stop backup. Oh, got to give it a reason. Let's just say others, and we'll click stop backup. Okay, so that is going to take effect. Okay, now that that is done, one more thing we need to do. We'll go over here to go to backup items. Click on Azure Storage. We're going to go in here to delete the backup data as well. What's the name of the data? Well, it's this container here called images. So I'm going to put in images, and then it's going to ask for a reason. I'm just going to put other, and then I'm going to hit delete. Okay, once that's done, there's actually one more thing we need to take care of. We're going to go back up to our backup vault, and we're going to scroll down and go to backup infrastructure. We're going to go to storage accounts, and we got to unregister the storage account. Even though the storage account no longer exists, we got to unregister the link to it. So I'm just going to copy the name here. Okay, it wants a reason. I'm just going to put other, and then comments. I'm going to say delete, and then I'm going to hit delete. Okay, once that's done, I'm going to go right into my backup vault here, and we're going to click to delete. Scroll down, I confirm, and click yes. That should go through the process now of successfully deleting the backup vault. Now I can delete the resource group officially, and that's it. Now I have completed everything I wanted to complete, and hopefully now all that makes sense. I know that was quite a journey just to get that thing deleted, but hopefully you gained some knowledge out of this. Now, one thing that never seems to change in our industry when it comes to security in our environments is dealing with updates and moving things into the cloud, such as having Azure virtual machines and all of that fun stuff. Well, it's not going to change. We still have to deal with updates. Our different operating systems that come out, whether they're the Windows client operating systems or the Windows Server operating systems, or if you're thinking in terms of even non-Windows operating systems that are hosted, then you still got to consider updates. And so I want to talk about how we go about doing that. And Microsoft is moving into this new system, a newer system that is called the Azure Update Manager. And I want to take a look at that with you and talk about how we can use the Azure Update Manager for sort of policing our updates that are out there and managing our updates that we're utilizing in our environment. So to start with, the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to create a quick virtual machine. We're just going to create this virtual machine. We're going to use it for this little demonstration, and then we're going to delete it when we're done. So it won't really use up a lot of Azure credit or any of that. So here we are on portal.azure.com. We'll click the menu button and go to all services. Just search for virtual machines, or if you see it on the screen like I do here, you can click on it. And then I'm going to click to create a Azure virtual machine. Now, the point of this video is not to get into the intricacies of building virtual machines. So please understand that. I'm not going to be explaining every little checkbox and every little drop down, because that's not the point of this. We just need to create a virtual machine very quickly so that we can see how we could use the update services in regards to this. Okay, so as far as creating a resource group, I'm just going to create a resource group. I'm just going to call this Azure Update RG for resource group. That'll be a nice little name for it. And then the virtual machine name, I'm just going to call this Update VM Demo. That's going to be the name of my VM. And I'm just going to use East US. My availability is going to be set to no infrastructure for redundancy. I'm going to go with Windows Server 2022. That's fine. You may have different options there. Just go with the Windows Server. It'll be fine. All right. I'm going to leave the default size here, and then I'm going to go down here and set my username and password. So I'm just going to say ELP admin for exam lab practice, and then I'm going to set a password that I'm going to use for this. All right, and type that again. All right. And then I'll leave RDP on, that's fine. I'm just going to click next for disk. I'm just going to go with standard HDD. Networking, leave that alone. I'm going to go over to management. And just in case if you were to forget to delete this for some reason, I'm going to do an auto shutdown, in my case at Eastern time. That way, if you did want to leave this virtual machine around to play around with it some more, you could, but I am going to delete it. But I'm going to do an auto shutdown just for safety. All right, so from there, if we wanted to enable Azure Backup, we could actually set up backup here. Not really diving into that right here, but from there, I am going to go and continue on. But I did want to point out, since we are talking about updates, you will see that there is an option right here that mentions guest operating system updates, enable hot patch. That's not available in this image, but it does tell you patch organization automatically by the operating system. So it is going to use the Windows Update automatic updates to handle that. Or you can do Azure orchestrated, or you can do manual updates. Well, we're going to end up controlling all that, but I did want to show you that this is one area where updates is managed. So now I'm going to go here to monitoring. I'm going to disable the boot diagnostics, and then I'm going to click review and create. And then once that's done verifying everything is good, I'm going to go ahead and click create. Now, while this is getting created, I want to point something out to you. If you go to Google or Bing and you do a quick search on about Azure Update Manager, you will see this article that you can click on in Google or Bing. And it talks about the Azure Automation Update Management, this Azure Update Manager. This is the newer system that Microsoft has released, and the main thing that it's going to do is provide a way for us to manage our latest features and updates that are going out to our devices. So you'll see it provides native experience with zero onboarding, Whereas before, the older system required you to install agents and onboarding and all that madness in order to get this to work. Another thing is it can use Azure policies now for managing updates. So you'll see that when you get in there and start playing around with it, that it uses this Azure policy model, which is a better system than before. It doesn't depend on log analytics. It doesn't depend on having an Azure automation account. All right. It natively supports the Azure Compute, which is like the VMs, as well as Azure Arc for servers, which is Azure Arc is what bridges between on-premise and the cloud. Okay, so it works with roles and identities, so you can manage roles and identities. You can manage who can do this with roles and identities. That's RBAC, role-based access control, which is good. You can control whether things need to be deployed automatically or if you want to do it on your own. All right, so very good. And this little drawing right here, if we open that up real big, you can see what's going on. All right, so what's great about this is I've got Linux machines, I've got Windows machine, I got on-premise network. We could have like a VPN or express route connection into Azure. From there, update management. They tell you Update Management Center, your virtual machine extensions, makes API calls from Windows Update Agent or Linux Package Manager, check for updates or deploy updates. So it does an assessment, and it tells you the assessment and deployment compliance data available in Azure Resource Graph. So basically that just means it's pulling in analytic data. And then Update Management Center for your virtual machine extensions are already there within Azure VMs. In other words, you can essentially control updates in a central place using this Azure Update Manager. That's essentially what they're. I don't know that that's super clear on that drawing for people, but that's where that drawing is trying to take you. Okay, so it does have support management for Azure VM or a non-Azure VM. Update Manager relies on the Azure extension, which is designed to provide all the full functionality required to interact with the operating systems and all that good stuff. So the Update Manager extension is installed and managed by the Azure VM Windows agent or the Azure Linux agent for Azure VMs. And then for Arc, enabled server agent for non-Azure Linux and Windows machines physically on your on-premise environment. Okay, so now hopefully we've had enough time for our little VM to get installed. If we jump back over, if we go to, let's see if it's done. Yeah, so it's done. Now I'm going to go over here to All Services. So click the menu button and go to All Services. I've got my VM installed. I'm going to do a search for the word Update. And you'll see I have a resource here that I can click on called Azure Update Manager. So we'll go there, and it should detect that we have one machine in our Azure environment. Keep in mind, if you've been doing a lot of playing around, or depending upon what you're doing, you may have more than one virtual machine. In my case right now, I just have that one, and I can actually click on it and see I've got this one virtual machine that's available right here that I can go to and look at. Okay, but I don't actually want to open that virtual machine right now. So what I want to do here is I can click on Updates, and I can see that I've not deployed any updates out at all. I have history. You can see if there's what the history is of me deploying updates. And let's go back over here. If we can also go to Overview, and we can just do a one-time update deployment if we want. Keep in mind that it hasn't actually pulled in any data yet from our virtual machine, but if I was to go here and click Install, I can say Install one-time updates. I can add the virtual machine right here. Click Add. All right, and if I wanted to go through this process of trying to deploy out some updates, I could. But the downside is you really got to wait on it to get update information and all that, which I'm not going to do right now. But really what I want to show you is what if I've got a lot of machines I need to deploy updates out to a lot of machines. So you can do that through Azure Policy. Now you can go to the menu button and go, you can go into policies through Azure directly, or the good news is you can just click Get Started right here, and then you can click to assign a policy. All right. So that brings me into Azure Policies, and it'll filter. If you didn't know this already, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of policies in Azure, And what this will do is just filter the ones related to updates. So you can see I've got these different policies that are available for deploying updates. So I can just I'll click this one right here. It says configure periodic checking for missing system updates on Azure virtual machines. We'll click that. All right. And then it brings up the policy definition, which if you're not familiar with policy definitions, that's written in JSON, JavaScript object notation, which can completely be manipulated by us if we want, but we are not diving into that in this video. We'll go right here and click Assign, and then the scope is going to be what are we deploying this to. So maybe I'm going to deploy this to my subscription to this resource group right here, Azure Update RG. Keep in mind, depending upon what you're doing, you may have different resource groups than me. The only resource group that I care about in this video is Azure Update RG. So I'm going to select that. I could have exclusions, all right, but I can also, and we're not diving into all this in this video, but there's some advanced capabilities you can do with policies. The point of this video is not really to get into Azure policies. It's to simply deploy this policy. So we click Review and Create. We click Create. This is going to deploy this policy to all the devices that are inside that resource group. Granted, there's only one policy that's inside that resource group at the moment, okay? But ultimately, if I go back over here to Azure Update Manager, that is going to now enable the deployment of the periodic updates checking and all that, and it'll go out to the machine after a certain amount of time, all right? And so that is how that is going to work for me, okay? All right, and so the next step is going to be to clear out my resource group. I no longer need that. I just wanted to show you the idea of the Azure Update Manager. So I'll now scroll down. I'll click on this virtual machine that I have, and then I'm going to click on the resource group. I'll go to Overview, click on the resource group Azure Update RG, and I'm just going to go right here, delete the resource group, copy it, apply, force delete, and that is going to delete the resource group as well as the virtual machine, so it will no longer take up any Azure credit. So as you can see, it says deleted the resource group, and so at that point it should be gone. I should be able to refresh here and probably get an error message. Yeah, so no resources match, and the resource group will disappear as well. And that's going to do it. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding now of the concept of Azure Update Management in regards to deploying this out with Azure policies.
I want to help you understand now the principles behind what's called the Zero Trust model. Now, the Zero Trust model, just so you know, is not just a Microsoft thing. Many different companies out there are taking on this same type of model, Microsoft being one of them. The Zero Trust model is a simple idea, and that is don't trust anything, don't trust anyone. The concept is to always assume that there's a breach. Okay, so there's never any assumption by the Azure environment or the Microsoft 365 services that this person that is trying to authenticate or this device that is trying to authenticate is who it or this person says they are. Okay, it just automatically verifies everything. So the logic here is verify explicitly, always authenticate, and give authorization based on whoever the user is or whoever the device is. The other thing is to always operate off the principle of least privilege. What that means is that everything we do in Azure, we should always be operating off the principle of least privilege, which means you always give out the least amount of rights to someone that they need to do their job. Or if you're talking about a device, you're giving out the least amount of rights to a device that still allows that device to do the job role it's needing to perform. So that is what least privilege is. And then again, the other thing is when it comes to administration in the Zero Trust model, we work off of what we call a JIT strategy, which stands for just-in-time administration. And then there's another strategy called JEA, which is just enough access. All right, which of course goes hand in hand with least privilege. So the idea being that I'm going to give you access when you need it during a short period of time that you need it, and then the permissions will be taken away from you when you no longer need it. Okay, Azure has the ability to use something called PIM, Privileged Identity Management, where I can schedule somebody to be given access to something for a certain period of time, and then after a while it goes away. For example, if I'm the head admin and I'm going out of town next week, and I have a junior level admin that needs to be given the ability to create users, I can schedule that person the ability to create users just next week. I can also make it where they do not have the power until they go and claim it, which means it audits it generates an audit entry and everything. And then when they do claim that power, it goes away after an hour, and then they have to go claim it again. And then it goes away permanently after, let's say, Friday of next week. I can do that with this concept that I have. The other piece of zero touch is, again, always assuming a breach. That involves the Azure Identity Protection features and all that, where you have artificial intelligence that are monitoring your users to confirm what they're doing at any given time. So you start with your identities here. Your identities being user, they mentioned human, non-human, strong authentication, and then also your endpoints. So what are your endpoints? Those are your different devices, right? That could be a desktop, laptop, tablet, smartphone, whatever it may be. Whether you're users or a device, you are authenticating to a directory service such as Azure AD. Now, when you are authenticating, the concept of zero touch is we have policies that have to be enforced, in which a person has to basically pass through those policies. If the policies don't allow you to connect in, then you're not able to access whatever it is. In Azure, we have something called conditional access policies and compliance policies that do just that. Compliance policies are going to control whether or not your device is at a certain level of compliance. Maybe you have to have a certain operating system, there's got to be a certain version, you have to have certain updates on the device, and if you don't meet all of those, you're not compliant. And then with pairing that with what's called conditional access policies, I could require that the user must also not be seen as any kind of a threat. Now, how would a user be seen as a threat? It might be the user's logging on during a time of day they normally don't log on. It might be that the user's using an IP address that they normally don't use. Maybe they're from a different internet connection. Instead of logging on in New York, they're logging on from China, right? Those are all things that can be seen as a threat. And so with these different policies in place, I can decide whether or not you're getting in. And this is all automated, so I can put all these policies in place ahead of time, and then determine whether or not that a person's going to get in based on that. All right. And then also we can control things like whether or not they're coming in from the public internet, or they're on a private network. And then from there, we also have the giving the rights out to the actual data itself. So whether or not you're getting access to your email or some kind of sensitive information, whether or not you're getting access to applications. Okay. And then even the infrastructure itself, such as virtual machines, which would be IaaS, maybe platform as a service, which could be some kind of web-based containers that they're given access to, or web app service of some kind. That's all part of that as well. All right. And the administration of that is also, again, controlled by the concept of JIT, just-in-time administration. Okay. A company can also draft an organizational policy where they have a document that kind of outlines what their goals are, and that's a good strategy to draft out a document that kind of outlines what our goals are, and then from there you can sort of create that based on the compliance policy, conditional access policy. But again, the main thing to get across here is that the zero trust model is all about verifying everything and verifying explicitly who and what is authenticating. And the other principle is use the least privilege access strategy. You only give the least privileges that someone or something needs to do their job. All right. And then when it comes to administration, you always use the strategy of just-in-time administration and just enough access. So that's JIT, JEA. Just-in-time administration, just enough access, okay? And then the zero touch model is always under the influence of always assume there's a breach, so that's why it's so important that we verify explicitly. But that is the idea of the zero trust model. I want to spend some time now getting an understanding of the Microsoft 365 Defender services that we have available to us. So the first thing to be aware of is understanding just what exactly is it, like in a nutshell. So here it is in a nutshell. The Defender services themselves, they're going to provide a full defense suite that's going to connect to the various services involved in Microsoft 365, as well as pieces of Azure itself, to try to provide a form of orchestration. That means it can help automate defenses and mitigations. It can identify issues, threats, allow you the ability to know what's going on by sending you alerts, providing auditing services, and of course, giving us a way to perform action and response in scenarios where things are going on in our environment that shouldn't. This is also going to be associated with our endpoint, so it is possible for it to not only monitor the cloud service side, but also have connectivity with the devices, also known as endpoints, in our organization. Okay, so this is going to really give us a lot of control. It also has the ability to learn from experience, gathering intelligence. It has artificial intelligence linked to this, so there's just a whole lot you can do. Now, there's actually different Defender services that make up the Microsoft 365 Defender suite of features that we have available to us. Here's a list of these various Defender services available. We're going to take a slightly deeper look at each one of these services individually right now. So we'll start with Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So the idea of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is this is a Defender service that can link to your devices that are in your on-premise environment, or even devices that are on the go, like laptops, smartphones, tablets, things like that. So we have what is known as endpoint behavior sensors, can be integrated with Windows 10 and higher. These sensors can grab data from the actual operating system itself. This information can be transmitted to our cloud services and let us know if there's any types of threats, malware, whatever it might be on those machines. So as kind of crazy as it sounds, yes, it does mean that these operating systems can be spying on our clients, our client machines. Now, we also have Cloud Security Analytics, which of course is gathering the data, as I said, sending it to the cloud from our behavioral sensors, and then from there we can use analytical data to discover, like on average, how many machines are infected, what are your average machines that are actually getting infected, are they specific operating systems, are they missing specific patches. It can help us in learning exactly which machines and why these machines are actually getting infected or while they're getting attacked. It also provides us with threat intelligence. So the idea there is Microsoft has what's called the Threat Intelligence Team. This is actually made up of about 3,000 different people worldwide, last time I checked, at least, that are part of this threat intelligence team, and they are constantly looking for vulnerabilities in the Microsoft environment, and also not just Microsoft, but like some of the various services that are integrated with Microsoft environment, and they are submitting patches or submitting fixes. Also, just in some cases, they're not submitting fixes, they're just letting Microsoft know, hey, there are problems, there are weaknesses, there's loopholes, there's backdoors, various things like that, so that these things can be patched by the Microsoft team. So that's the idea of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. Let's take a look at the next one. So then we have Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So this is, at first, when this whole concept kind of first came out, this used to be sort of just involving Exchange, and the foundation of this really does start with email. So in Microsoft Exchange Online, we have something called EOP, that is Exchange Online Protection, and it's going to provide your basic services like virus protection and all of that coming into the Exchange environment. So there's actually 3 different virus scanning protections that Microsoft uses, 3 different vendors of virus scanners that actually do protection against viruses and all of that fun stuff. But as you can imagine, hackers are very sneaky. They have ways of masking things and hiding things so that these virus protections might miss those things. So Microsoft offers another level of protection, which of course is where Defender for Office 365 comes in. So they actually do have a different subscriptions or licenses depending upon your Microsoft 365 license. You may have the Plan 1 or Premium 1 or Plan 2 Premium 2. And the idea being that P1 is going to protect email collaboration, provide 0-day malware protection, phishing, check for phishing emails, and all that. One of the things that's great about Defender for Office 365, just the very first version of it, P1, is that it is going to check for safe it does what's called safe attachments and safe links. That means that it actually has a little detonation chamber where it opens up attachments and also checks links. It has a little web browser. It actually does this in the background. It's like a little virtual machine detonation chamber that happens on the Microsoft side where everything gets checked before it goes through. So your emails and all that stuff go through this detonation chamber before it actually allows the email to go through. Now, here's the other thing that's great about this. This is not just called Defender for Exchange Online. It's actually Defender for Office 365, which means it supports Teams and the other products as well, SharePoint, OneDrive, and all that fun stuff. So this is not just for email, even though email is a big part of it. Okay. The other thing is if you've got P2, it's going to add investigation, hunting, response capabilities, automations, and simulations. So not only does it try to stop attacks, but it provides a lot of advanced features for us as admins to discover analytic data and help prevent these types of attacks in the future, and also just know in general who's being attacked. Okay. So again, the idea being that we can protect, detect what's going on, investigate what's going on, and then respond. Well, with just Exchange Online protection, it's just a protection capability. It's a very static thing. It's not as sophisticated as what we get with P1 of Defender for Office 365. With Defender for Office 365, it's going to provide protection, but it doesn't really provide the ability to do a lot of investigations and maybe determine, if there's average users that are the ones that are always getting targeted, and provide us with some automation and also what's called simulations, which is really cool, where we can actually send out simulated attacks against our users to see who falls for it. That's where you get into P2. All right, let's look at the next one. So then we have Microsoft Defender for Identity. So Defender for Identity, the idea being that this is a service that is going to be integrated with both our cloud services as well as our on-premise Active Directory. If we have a Microsoft domain, this will integrate with that. It'll integrate with our cloud-based identities as well, such as Microsoft Entra ID or formerly Azure AD. And the great thing about this is this allows somebody like a SecOps, security operations team, to have the ability of looking at threats as a whole from the various identities. And it's not just the Microsoft identity providers, but if you're using another type of identity provider, this can be integrated with that as well, such as if you're using Amazon Web Services or Google or somebody like that. Okay, so this can really tighten our security with our identities, look for security breaches, do what's called posture assessments. A posture assessment being looking at how well our company keeps things up to date with security, how frequently we're analyzing and monitoring and all of that. And we have a scoring system that's really neat with this that gives us a score and all that. So we have real-time detection, we have in-depth investigation, and then also automated responses for this. Okay. Also, this used to be called Advanced Threat Protection, ATP. And that actually, it was kind of integrated with the Defender for Office 365 as well, which was also linked to this, which was ATP. So the only reason I mention that is just because some of the older documentation out there will sometimes still refer to this as ATP. All right, but it's been like this now for a while, so shouldn't be too much old documentation out there that says this, but I did want to warn you about that. Okay, so then we got Defender for Cloud Apps. This used to be called Cloud App Security. So this is another term that has been renamed, and it's now called Defender for Cloud Apps. So if you've ever heard of what is called a Cloud App Security Broker, this was a device. Originally, it was like a device you could hook into your network, and it would monitor specifically cloud-related services. So the various services that people are using on the cloud, it would monitor and restrict what they can do. Well, this is a kind of a different spin on that concept. With Defender for Cloud Apps, this integrates with our operating systems, our Windows operating systems, and various operating systems in our environment, and it can deploy out policies that can restrict the places people can go on the internet. It can restrict certain activities they can do. For example, you might allow Dropbox for your business, but you might not allow Dropbox Personal. If a person tries to use Dropbox Personal, then it would block it. And so there's a difference between just saying, hey, I want to block Dropbox.com, or saying, hey, I'm going to block just Dropbox Personal, but I'm going to allow Dropbox Business. So Dropbox.com is still allowed, but only if you're using the company's business account. Anyway, it's a really neat idea. Obviously, I'm not diving deep into that right now, but I did want you to have the basic idea. So Defender for Cloud Apps monitors the different cloud applications that people are using, software as a service applications, and we can have restrictions for what they can and cannot do. It also provides us with a lot of intelligence and reports and all that as to what they're doing. So then we have Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Management. So of course this is linking specifically to vulnerabilities out there on our various operating systems. It keeps track of the latest and greatest vulnerabilities that have been discovered for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, iOS, and even some of our various network devices. And this is again ties to the Microsoft Threat Intelligence team. They're a security team that's constantly looking for vulnerabilities, and it can keep track on whether or not any of these vulnerabilities are out there in our environment. So it goes a bigger step further than what we have with just standard malware protection or virus protection and all that. It's actually keeping track of the various vulnerabilities and whether or not devices are properly patched like they're supposed to be. So then we have Microsoft Entra ID protection. This is specific to Microsoft Entra ID. Now remember, Entra ID is formerly known as Azure AD. So be aware of that. Microsoft has changed the name Azure AD. There is still a lot of documentation that mentions Azure AD. I'm going through the process myself of trying to update. I've got thousands of hours of videos in all my various courses actually that still mention Azure AD. So I'm slowly but surely trying to get those upgraded. But be aware that even in my courses and videos, you may hear me refer to it as Azure AD. But ultimately, the new name is Entra ID. And Entra ID protection is all about linking to our Entra ID environment and analyzing security risk involved with our users, but also allowing us to put in policies that restrict what users can and cannot do in our environment, and whether or not they're allowed to connect to things in our environment. So it looks for what our users are doing, the activities they're performing, where they're logging on from, when they're logging on, if they're logging on from multiple computers in different places. Those are the types of things that it can do, and then it can either allow or block based on that, or it can challenge a user. For example, if a user looks suspicious, it has the ability to challenge the user to determine whether or not they should be allowed to connect in. Okay, so that's the idea of Microsoft Entra ID protection. So then we have Microsoft Data Loss Prevention, DLP, and data loss prevention is a capability that we support with this that can monitor for sensitive types of information. So there are all sorts of patterns that can make up whether something is considered a sensitive device or sensitive, I should say, a piece of sensitive information on a device. And it has the ability to determine things like credit cards and health records and social security numbers and all of that stuff, the various types of data that could be considered sensitive. From there, when DLP recognizes something is sensitive, there can be safeguards put in place to prevent users from doing things that maybe they shouldn't do. For example, I can prevent users from sharing data outside the organization if I want, or with certain people. I can make it where they can't copy and paste certain data from a document. So if they had a credit card number in a spreadsheet, I can make it where they can't print that. I can make it where they can't share it. So I can put in safeguards. Now, the thing to understand here, of course, is that if somebody is hardcore about leaking some piece of information, they're probably going to figure out a way to do it, right? But a lot of times when information gets leaked, it's by accident. It's a mistake. And DLP is going to prevent a lot of that from happening. This is going to be integrated with Teams and Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. It works with our applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Windows, Mac OS. It also can work with some of the non-Microsoft Cloud applications that are out there. There's various applications that do support Microsoft DLP. It supports on-premise files, so it's not just a cloud thing linked to on-premise. It also supports Power BI, or also known as Power Business Intelligence. And the final thing that we have here is app governance. And this is going to link to Defender for Cloud Apps to a certain extent. But the goal here is to provide security and policy capabilities for OAuth-enabled app registration, which is open authorization. And the idea being, and this is a link with Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD, as well as applications like Google and Salesforce and things like that. That's where the OAuth comes in, open authorization. And the goal here being to provide information such as insights, which is going to give us, sort of like a glimpse of the data associated with our Entra ID, formerly Azure AD, Google, Salesforce, and provide us a way to monitor the status of those apps. It also provides governance, which is going to allow us to proactively or even reactively set up policies to address apps and user behaviors and look for non-compliant or even malicious app usage in the environment. It also provides detection, so it looks for alert. It can provide alerts and notifications if there's anything unusual going on. And then remediation, which is it can try to remediate or address the problem that's going on. Any type of an abnormal activity that might be happening, it can try to remediate that. It might link to something that challenges a user. It might alert an admin. There's various things. And of course, to clarify here, I'm not really digging deep into that. The purpose of this video wasn't to dig deep into any of these services, but mostly just to give you sort of an overview or introduction to each one of the Microsoft 365 Defender services. And I hope you gain that from this video. Now, as we start digging into Microsoft 365 security, the first thing to be aware of is that we have Microsoft 365 Defender and we have Purview, and the two are directly related to each other. Now, what I'm trying to say is you can't really learn Microsoft 365 Defender without learning a little bit about Microsoft 365 Purview, and you can't learn Purview without learning Microsoft 365 Defender. So let's talk a little bit about all of that. Let's take a look at the admin centers before we really start diving in more. So here we are on portal.azure.com. We're going to click the Show All ellipse symbol right here, and then you're going to see a blade called Security and a blade called Compliance. The Security blade is going to bring you into the Microsoft 365 Defender Admin Center, and then Compliance is going to bring you into Purview. So we'll start here. I'll just click on Security, which brings you to security.microsoft.com, and here we are in Microsoft 365 Defender. Now, always be aware that when you activate your licensing, you need to give it a while before some of this stuff begins getting populated. So just be aware of the fact that depending upon when you activated your licensing and all that, you may not have everything that I have right here. You sometimes need to wait 45 minutes to an hour before everything is fully there. So I wouldn't stress out about that too much, but as you can see, here we are in Microsoft 365 Defender. All right. And you have various blades here that you can control. I'm not going to be diving into all the blades in this video. I just wanted to show you the admin center. Okay. Now, if we come back over to portal.azure.com, Microsoft.com. We'll click on compliance this time, and that's going to bring us into the Microsoft Purview. So here we are in the compliance area. So these two are very, very related. Microsoft Purview is very much geared towards the compliance side of Microsoft 365. Okay, this gets a lot into making sure things are properly compliant. It's going to allow us to generate various types of policies that will involve compliance and all that. And then when we get back over here to Microsoft 365 Defender, this is going to involve us being able to implement certain policies such as the Microsoft 365 Defender for Office 365, all of that. Cloud App Discovery, which gets into Defender for Cloud Apps. So there's a lot of things here for locking things down. But remember, these two are related. Purview and Defender are related. You can't really learn one without learning a little bit about the other. Okay? All right, and of course we are going to, now that we kind of have an overview of the two admin centers, we can kind of start diving in deeper. I'd now like to get into planning and understanding the concepts of insider risk management. So what is insider risk management? All right, so insider risk management is of course, the concepts of being concerned about users within your organization that are doing things that maybe we wouldn't want them to do. This could be accidental, this could be malicious. But insider risk management is actually a set of tools that are available in Microsoft Purview. So this is more than just a general concept of, hey, I want to protect myself from insider risk, but it's actually a set of tools that's going to assist me with doing that. All right. And again, this is found inside Microsoft Purview. It is a compliance-based solution that's going to help us with detecting and investigating any type of malicious activity from inside our company, or even accidental. All right, we're going to be able to set policies that are going to help us define what types of risk that we want to look for, and then we can even, if we do find, say, some malicious activities or something like that we want to escalate, we can escalate those into a case within Microsoft eDiscovery Premium. We also have the ability to just look at analysis information. So we can have risk analysis done and help us determine if our company is at the proper compliance standards that we want them to be at. All right, so what are some of the modern risk pain points? In other words, some of the issue, the areas that a lot of organizations have to be concerned about. So this is definitely going to follow things like leaks of sensitive data, or what they call data spillage. That's where information gets leaked out due to maybe information being associated with something that's shared around. You could have sensitive information in a file that it really serves a specific job, and the information is just extra information that's found in that file, and then the information that you're actually needing to share, maybe you share a document that has this extra information in it that you didn't even really mean to share, but it's in that document. So that gets into things like data spillage. We have confidentiality violations. People are communicating and saying things that they really shouldn't say. Intellectual property theft, so IP theft, where people are just using someone else's intellectual property for their own gain. You have fraud, obviously, insider trading, and then of course we have to be concerned about regulatory compliance violations. So that gets into some of the different regulatory compliance like HIPAA and PCI DSS and GDPR, and some of the various considerations for regulations that we might be under based on the country we are from. Also, in some cases, in like the United States, there's actually some regulations that are specific to what state you're in. The other thing would be, to consider here that in your modern workspace for your users could be anywhere. They could have a workspace at home, in the office. Their workspace could be in a building, which is their workplace that they actually work, or it could be at home, right? It could be anywhere. Users are able to basically create, manage, and share data off various platforms, various pieces of software, and it's harder nowadays than it was decades back to keep control over things just because everybody's so spread out. It also enables people to say things a lot, have a lot more privacy than they once did when they were all together inside of a building where people could hear what people are saying. Nowadays, with all these messaging programs and the ability to send emails and all that, we need other tools to assist us with this, and this is what we're trying to do with this. Here's some of the principles of insider risk management. First would be transparency. There's a balance between trying to provide privacy for our users versus also trying to keep our organization's sensitive information safe. So transparency with risk management is to try to provide privacy by design. In a lot of cases, you can allow certain key personnel to have access to some of this insider risk management, but we can also have usernames and things like that hidden in certain circumstances so that these certain people don't know who these people are. Now, of course, certain admins can also determine the users in question and have access to the data and everything else that is being potentially misused. Okay. We've got configurable or configurable policies. So there's policies that are going to help us with dealing with all of this. We have integrations. So it's all integrated with Microsoft Purview and all the Microsoft 365 apps and all that that are utilized with Purview. And then finally, actionable, meaning that we have some inside information and alerts and notifications that lets us know, hey, there have been some issues that have arisen and we need to investigate those and take action. Here is the workflow that Microsoft kind of lays out for this. So you'll notice that, first you might define a policy or set of policies that are going to help us in triggering alerts and knowing that something has occurred. Then when alerts do occur, we would triage, and triage means prioritize, right? We would put priority over, the more severe cases that may be, may have issues that have arisen. And then we would investigate the triaged, priority-based alerts, the things that we feel like we need to investigate first, and we would then take action. Now, part of this might involve collaboration with not only compliance, but human resources, the legal department, the security team. So there might be various people or departments that need to be involved in this workflow process. So as far as policies go, and again, this is kind of the starting point, Microsoft provides us with quite a few policy templates that we can draw from for setting all of this up. You'll see that listed here: data theft by departing users, data leaks, or not just general data leaks, but you can have priority users you want to focus on, risky users you want to focus on. We can do general security policy violations, or we can be more specific and base it on departing users, risky users, priority users, patient data misuse. Again, that gets into HIPAA compliance, the medical world, and then also things like risky browser usage. And then, of course, you can customize and mix and match and filter and all of that with these policies. Then you've got alerts. So one of the things a policy is going to do is trigger alerts. We'll have an alerts dashboard that we can go to, take a look at what's going on and review those alerts, and can be based on the user's ID, the user's name, alert, the alert type it was, the status, the severity of the alert, the time it was detected. It'll assign what's called a case to that, and then you can look at the case status. That gets into sort of if we are actively taking action on this alert, or if we haven't taken any action yet. That's the idea of a case status. And then we can look at things like risk factors. And so Microsoft will, not all cases, but in some cases, provide a type of risk factor that could be involved in the type of alert that was discovered. So then we triage, so we prioritize, right? And we would look at the activities that have occurred, and prioritize that. So for example, if you got a new user and a new user is triggering alerts right out of the gates, then maybe we triage that because this is a new person for the company and we would want to, try to review and evaluate that. But ultimately, it's up to us on how we triage or how we prioritize. We do have the ability to filter through the alerts, and based on severity, we could prioritize simply based on that if we want. Okay. Then we've got investigate. So again, once we've kind of decided which alerts we need to focus on, we can investigate, and you'll go to what's called the case dashboard. So these will be broken up into cases, and we can investigate based on that case, and it'll pull everything into this case dashboard, and we can look at the specific information we want based on things like user activity. So what activities were performed. We could filter through the activities or the history of the activities, the risk history of that user or users that were involved. We've got Content Explorer, which lets us see the data files, any kind of email messages that were involved. We can view all of that. And then also, as we are reviewing data, we have what are called case notes, where we can type information related to what we've discovered. It may be that this goes on for multiple days. We have multiple people that are doing the investigation, and so we want to make sure that we jot down anything that might help investigation continue. And the very last thing here is taking action. So one of the things we can do, if we have eDiscovery Premium, not just standard, but Premium, we can escalate the cases that we're investigating into eDiscovery Premium. That means we can basically pull all that over, and it can be put in a format that can be used by a legal team or a court of law. And with eDiscovery Premium, we can involve legal teams very easily and give them access to the cases for taking legal action. So, for example, if a user is discovered doing something malicious that's illegal, like maybe insider trading or something like that, we could get the legal team involved, and they can assist with utilizing eDiscovery Premium. Finally, the last thing there at the very bottom, last bullet, you'll notice it talks about Office 365 Management APIs. One of the things that we can do with all of this data is it can be exported to a SIEM product, or SIEM, however you like to say it, which is Security Information and Event Management. And this data could be pulled into that type of product as well. And this can also help us with organizing and dealing with reporting. And some people aren't, some people have a third-party SIEM product. So Microsoft wants to play well with others and allow for the ability to export. Okay, but ultimately, of course, taking action is our last step. That's where we're actually, going to, not just investigate, but we're going to. Because could be involve getting legal involved, or it could involve having a meeting with the people involved. You could be firing the person that's involved. There could be some kind of disciplinary action involved, or it might just involve training. The employees, if they make mistakes and accidents, they need to be trained. So that might simply be the action that's taken. But ultimately, insider risk management in the Microsoft Purview is all about giving us the right tools to be able to detect different things that are happening, investigate these things, and then take action. Now, the first thing to know if you are going to implement insider risk policies is you are going to need the proper licensing for it. The licensing for this can be a little bit odd, a little bit confusing, and so we need to take a look at that first. So if we go to Google or Bing and do a search for Microsoft Insider Risk Management Licensing, you can find this little link right here, Get Started with Insider Risk Management. If we go there, it tells us what we need in order to support this. So you have to have, for subscription licensing, Microsoft 365 E5, A5, F5, G5 subscription, paid or trial. Or the E3, if you got E3, you will need the compliance add-on. If you got Microsoft 365 E3, A3, F3, G3, you will need one of these, or with the Insider Risk Management add-on. Or if you got Office 365 E3, you will need EMS E3 and the Microsoft 365 E5. For some reason, they don't even mention Office 365 E5, but pretty much it's going to go hand in hand with this right here. Now, in my case, right out of the gates here, I have the Office 365 E5 and I have EMS E5, but I don't have this one right here, so I've had to add that one. So what we want to do is we want to go and we would want to find this, and we would need to activate the free trial of the Microsoft 365 E5 compliance add-on. If you want to do hands-on with this, this is going to be the way to go. Okay, so if we come back over here to portal.microsoft.com, we go to the marketplace. All right, if we go to all products, okay, and then we'll do a search for, let's do add-ons, and we'll just search for compliance. The keyword's compliance, and then you'll see the Microsoft 365 E5 compliance. So Microsoft 365 E5 compliance, that's what we need. So what we would do is we would go to details on that, and then you can do the free trial. I've actually already enabled the free trial on my side. And so, but what you would need to do is turn that on. And then the other thing that I've done with that is, if I go over here to licenses, and keep in mind you may not see the exact same licenses as me if you're doing this. The only one we really care about here is this one. I've already assigned that license. Once it loads up, you'll see it, to myself, John Christopher. You can see it gives you a total of 25 to kind of play around with. Also, the others that matters, I have Office 365 E5, and then I've also got Enterprise Mobility plus Security E5. So those are the licenses that or subscriptions I've already got. Those are really the only ones that matter here. Now, once we've activated that, you might need to wait about 15 minutes. But you click Show All, go to Compliance. That'll bring you into Microsoft Purview. And once we get into Microsoft Purview, we can scroll down and we'll see, you'll have Insider Risk Management anyway, but what you won't see when you click on it is you won't see the ability to really do anything. It's just going to have a bunch of information about it. But if you have the proper subscriptions, you will see this stuff here. So that's how we know that everything is there, and that I can now go over to policies, and I have the ability to create a policy if I want to. Okay, so I'm also going to notice here it says scan for potential risk in your organization. Turn on analytics to scan user activity daily. You'll get real-time anonymized insights to help you set up and refine policies so you're detecting the most recent relevant activity. So I can go ahead and say turn that on. Okay, now they do kind of warn you that this is going to take some time before this will be officially available to really gather analytics. As with many things in Microsoft 365 and Azure, you have to be patient. We're going to go right here now. We're going to create a policy. All right, and then you're going to notice that it breaks into these categories: data theft, data leaks, security policy violation, health record misuse, risky browser usage, and I can select various things here. Now, one thing you'll also notice is that it says data theft by departing users. In this case, detects data theft by departing users near the resignation or termination date. So there's some prerequisites here. It tells you that you can utilize an HR connector, and they tell you details about setting up an HR. If you have some kind of HR software or something like that, you can add connectivity with that for dealing with HR. You've got physical badge connector as well. So if your company is using a badging software for like their ID and stuff, their badges that they carry around with them, you can link to that. All right. Tells you got triggering events that'll do this. HR data imports termination or resignation date. So if you're using HR software, this can be imported in. It also can be imported in and linked with CSV format as well. If you look at the article on that, you can do that. We don't really have to dive that deep into it here for what we're doing, but you can look at data leaks for priority users. So you could choose specific users that you want maybe to analyze with this. So I could choose and set up like a link to a specific group. You'll see how I can do that here in a moment. Security policy violations, so you can configure stuff here. Now, you will notice that a lot of this will require Microsoft Defender for Endpoint if you want to utilize security policy violations involving the policies like down on a machine. Okay, right here you've got health record misuse. You can link a healthcare connector if your organization is using an EMR, electronic medical record system. You can link to that. They show you how you could do that here. And then down here at the bottom, we've got risky browser usage. So from there, I could link to any machine that's linked into my Azure AD environment, or Intra ID environment, as it's now called. I can utilize that. Okay, so we'll click next on that one. I'll just call this Demo Insider Risk Policy. We'll click next. Do I want to include all users? Do I want to include a specific user? So I could do all users, or this is where I was telling you could do specific users or a group of users. So I'll say include all, next. And then from there, it's asking me decide whether to prioritize content. It says you can prioritize content based on factors like where it's stored and how it's classified. Risk scores are increased for any activity that contains priority content, which is turned on, which in turn increases the chance of generating a high severity rate. Specifying what content to prioritize isn't relevant for templates you selected. So it's telling you I don't really, for what I'm doing here, isn't really a priority-based solution. That's why this is grayed out. So I don't want to prioritize content right now. Click next. Some of them you will, because you'll have to select a series of things you want to look for. Like, for example, if I would have gone and done some of these other ones, I'll have options for like prioritizing SharePoint over other items, for example. So then it says user browse to a potential risky website, select which activities will trigger this event. Unable to select some indicators, this is because they're currently turned off in your organization. So we can turn that on. Okay, it says turn on indicators within your organization. All right, so I could say I could choose specific ones, or I could say turn on all indicators. So this is stuff that's obviously not turned on by default, but I can now turn it on. So now I can go through here and say child abuse websites, criminal activity, cult websites, any of these that I want to look at. I'll just turn them all on. Next. Then it says each trigger you selected uses default thresholds to bring users into the scope of a policy. Threshold is based on the number of events recorded for an activity per day per triggering dimension. However, you can bypass these defaults, specify your own. So if I wanted to do custom, I can set a number of times this can happen a day to trigger the alert information and all that. I'm just going to stick with the defaults, which is pretty much just 10. But we'll as you can see, those are the defaults, but we'll stick with that. So we'll click next. It says, okay, you've selected your indicators. Indicators generate alerts, basically 13 indicators that I've selected. We're going to click next now. Now it says, decide whether to use default or custom indicator thresholds. Each indicator you selected uses default thresholds that influence activity's risk score, which in turn determines whether an alert's severity is low, medium, or high. Okay, the threshold is based on the number of events recorded for an activity per day, and it does tell you, however, you can bypass these defaults and specify your own. It also tells me that do I want to turn on analytics to get recommended thresholds based on a daily scans and all that. So I could turn on analytics. I can go with the defaults on that, or I could select my own. So if I'm getting up to 10, it's considered low, 20, medium, 30 is high, so on and so forth on each of those. I'm just going to leave it set to the defaults, and we'll click next. And at that point, we can review everything we've done, and we'll click to submit. It does tell you this can take up to 24 hours for any of this to take effect. So you do need to understand that you're not really going to see a whole lot going on until all that happens. I've also got this down here. It says send me the following emails when a new policy generates its first alert, when new high severity alerts are generated, and weekly summarization. Okay, saved my preferences. Let me also kind of warn you that this is all changing constantly. This is another one of those features that Microsoft, it feels like they change it week after week after week. So, don't be surprised if your screen looks a little different than mine. It's just part of having to get used to the way the cloud world works. You got to get used to things not always looking the same. Even when you read Microsoft's own articles, the screens don't look the same. So you do have to understand things are constantly changing here. But that's it. I'm going to click Done, and my policy has now been created. And as you can see, that's going to be the process for setting up an insider risk management policy.
I now want to help you understand the concept of something known as Zero Trust RAMP. If you actually go to Google or Bing, do a quick search on Microsoft RAMP, R-A-M-P, you'll find an article that's labeled Zero Trust Rapid Modernization Plan. That's what this is right here. And so they tell you here that the goal is to provide you with a rapid modernization plan, which is going to give you guidance on various initiatives that you can put in place for deployment paths for putting in key layers for strengthening your environment, basically providing protection. The main thing they get across here, the guidance that it's giving you, is it's going to provide you with a way of mapping out things like, okay, who are our key stakeholders that need to be involved in security? Who are our implementers? What's their accountabilities involved here? And our plan is to more quickly be able to put procedures and protections in place as time goes on, because as time goes on, things are changing, things are being more modernized, and we got to have security controls in place to combat the fact that new compromises are being discovered every day. All right, this is going to also provide us with a checklist of deployment objectives, things that we can follow step by step. All right, so you can see what they've laid out here. They mentioned that the RAMP initiatives for Zero Trust, top priority is to discover, first off, what is our critical processes that are in our environment that we can't live without, and then we've got to put different layers of protection in place that's going to strengthen those. So they mention here top priority, explicitly validate trust for all access requests, identities, endpoint devices, apps, network. These are our key pillars right here. And if I actually click on this link right here, it even provides a checklist individually for that. So, identifying in your Zero Trust model your identities, meaning your different users and devices and things like that are accessing your environment, and the procedures, of course, as time goes on, we learn that the different ways to protect all those things. Obviously, I'm not explaining every key point for protecting our devices and our users in this video, but that's stuff you learn, right? So when we think about our accounts, we want to protect our account credentials, our endpoints, we want to lock those down to our applications, our network, all that stuff. We want to have protections in place. Another thing, of course, is ransomware. That's a big deal, being ready for that, making sure we've provided backups and our data is protected, our data is encrypted and locked down, and then also, again, going back to the key thing here is to have backups and have a restoration plan. Modernize security operations. So, in other words, we need a streamlined response. That's where we start getting into things like Microsoft Sentinel with a SIEM and SOAR, these capabilities and all that. Again, not digging deep into that right now. I'm just giving you kind of an overview of that. This is all stuff to learn. But Microsoft Defender with Microsoft Defender for Cloud and the various versions of Microsoft Defender, or I should say subsets of Microsoft Defender, such as Microsoft Defender for Cloud apps and Microsoft Defender for Office 365 and all of these various different services that are going to lock things down and keep us secure. We got to have streamlined response. In other words, ways of providing alerts and taking action, and a lot of those actions can even be automated. We have unified visibility. Unify visibility means that we have a way for the key implementers involved here, key admins, to be able to see everything and be able to visualize what's going on. And from there, we can hopefully reduce risk in our environment by implementing these services, but then also we can manually reduce manual effort involved. Once you have all of these services in place, a lot of automation and all that will happen. And then, of course, as needed, they mention things like operational technology and IoT, Internet of Things. If you've got those various types of services in your environment, you'll want to have services in place to help protect those as well. Discover what's there, put protections in place, and, of course, monitor everything that's going on. Another thing, of course, is if you're dealing with data centers and DevOps security, you gotta make sure your security hygiene is good. You're on top of everything. You're getting rid of legacy. You're implementing proper secure DevOps, or what we also call DevSecOps. And then segmentation gets into separating everything. Anyway, this is just kind of like, hey, this is sort of a high-level look at what the whole purpose of RAMP is. And RAMP is something that a company could put in place to use sort of as a checklist to help us with locking down our environment. And now I want to get into the concepts of securing hybrid and multi-cloud environments. So there's a few things to understand here. First thing we want to understand is make sure we are clear on what is the difference. So big thing here is, to be aware that when you're talking about multi-cloud environments, you're talking about an environment that's going to utilize different cloud service, various types of tools and services that are being hosted on a cloud provider such as Microsoft Azure or AWS or somebody like that. And this is going to allow your business to manage different projects and control these different projects across these various clouds. And in a lot of cases, again, with multi-cloud, the concept is you might have some services hosted in, say, Azure. You might have some services hosted in AWS or some other cloud provider. Now, in a hybrid environment, you're incorporating possibly you've got cloud services being hosted, but you also have a lot of on-premises services going as well. So you might have a set of Microsoft servers, you might have Active Directory on-premise, as well as Intra ID, formerly known as Azure AD, in the cloud. Okay, and some of these services are publicly hosted clouds, meaning they're hosted on the infrastructure of the cloud provider along with other customers, or they might be privately hosted. Okay, so one of the advantages of utilizing hybrid and multi-cloud environments is just having the flexibility to put your services wherever you want and manage them whenever you want and however you want. Of course, this does add some complexity in securing those environments. Now, why is multi-cloud security important? Well, of course, we are hosting our assets out there in the cloud. These are out on the internet, which of course means that we need to secure those. And we know that there's going to be possibly people out there that want to get into our environment, if anything, just to see what we've got, or if we are a higher security organization, then our risk of being compromised increase because of the types of data and other assets that we're hosting. So some key advantages here, if you go the strategies that we're talking about here in terms of multi-cloud and hybrid security, here's some of the key advantages. You have increased reliability. So if you are going to employ the security measures with multi-cloud environments and put into practice some of the things we're going to talk about, you're going to be safeguarding your assets, you're going to be protecting your data, and of course this is going to help you with locking down your services and applications. It's going to provide security for your users by improving the verification processes users go through when authenticating as well as accessing these resources. And then another thing would be constant security. With cloud services now, with the help of AI and a lot of the machine learning capabilities, we have the ability to have constant surveillance, constant security, and of course we can automate a lot of that. We can automate logging and alerts and notifications and all that. This is going to help reduce the cost in terms of managing the security of it. We're not having to employ as many bodies of admins, if you will, to keep an eye on things. And in a lot of cases, you may say, well, doesn't this take away jobs? Well, companies usually couldn't afford to have 24-hour surveillance on their networks. Most companies couldn't anyway. So if anything, it's taking load off of these individual admins and assisting them, minimizing the amount of effort and man hours that it might take to keep an eye on things. And finally, again, this kind of goes hand in hand. The last thing here is centralized visibility, meaning we have a central place that we can look and manage everything with the help of Microsoft Sentinel and Microsoft Defender and all of that. We have these central dashboards that help us keep an eye on things and manage everything. Key considerations for multi-cloud security. So here's some of the things to consider. These are definitely some of the challenges that we want to be thinking about. One being that the security posture of your cloud resources. So let's clarify real quick. What is security posture? Security posture is making sure that we are maintaining our security, not just putting a bunch of security capabilities and services in place and then expecting everything just to, be secure forever, but it's staying on top of it. Security posture is something you have to maintain. You have to stay on top of. It's kind of like if you are a bodybuilder and you go and you lift weights and you gain all these muscles and you're like the size of Arnold Schwarzenegger in his heydays, and then all of a sudden you just stop working out for the rest of your life. Well, would you keep all of those muscles? Would you stay that strong? Absolutely not. That posture, if you will, all that strength that you gained would diminish. If you want to, stay the size of Arnold Schwarzenegger, you would have to continuously work out. Well, the same thing when you think about security posture in your environment. So we want to make sure that we implement security procedures, but we stay on top of that. So that's going to be one of the best ways that you can help protect multi-cloud and hybrid environments is to stay on top of that and have these different tools and all of that are going to be available to you to help you investigate and provide reporting and threat detection and all of that. Of course, another thing is authentication. So what is authentication? That is someone or something proving they are who they say they are. We need to be using the latest and greatest authentication strategies like multi-factor authentication. We need to have things like conditional access policies in there that are verifying in making sure that even though you've authenticated, you are adhering to certain security practices. And then or security practices and security procedures that the user is using when they're logged on. The next would be updates, keeping software updated. So any software that is installed on our devices, we need to stay up to date with that software. And we all hate dealing with updates, but having good security posture is, unfortunately, part of that is going to be keeping things updated because there are all types of exploits that are coming out all the time. Another thing is native security support, supporting the latest and greatest security features and implementing those features in regards to our software. Okay, your various security platforms such as let's say the latest version of Windows client operating system or the latest version of Windows Server operating system. If you've got those in your environment, you got to keep those updated. And then lastly, we have centralized visibility. The idea here is, avoid a setup that maybe is going to require you to jump back and forth between platforms to get a big picture. And sometimes that can be difficult because sometimes we're implementing Windows and maybe we're implementing Linux and we have Apple devices. We need a solution that's going to help unify all of this. And you're going to find that a lot of these Microsoft solutions absolutely do. So types of multi-cloud security threats that we need to be concerned about. So, these are some of the things you want to consider as far as threats goes. The first would be the absence of cohesive management and policy enforcement. This is where you get into a lot of times companies don't come up with a central set of policies that they want to enforce, and they don't communicate. Admins who set these things up don't communicate with other admins, and so there's no centralization, there's no cohesive management there. Another thing is departmental barriers, personal limitations, deficiencies in training. This gets into a lot of your issues with management sometimes not agreeing on what should be in place. Another thing would be personal limitations and deficiency in training. This gets in, a big part of that is organizations don't want to provide training. for their users. And of course, that makes things difficult. And even sometimes when they do provide training, they don't give the power over to the admins to implement the things they've been trained on. So you run into issues like that. And another is a safeguarding computational task, no matter their location. So considering where tasks are taking place and which region they might be taking place in, and is that region safe? You've got shortfalls in system compatibility, making sure that you have compatibility in your system. Sometimes that's not, things are not considered in that regards. And you got errors in configuration or deviation over time. So this is a kind of a slow fade of you have everything set up, everything's up to date, everything's secure, but then over time, things, you might start getting errors, and really what we need to do is try to knock those errors out when they come up, instead of letting them sort of seep in and happen more and more over time. This is going to be important for us to generate alerts and logs and know when errors occur. Another is inadequate oversight of different platforms, not being familiar with the various platforms that we are using. Again, you have Windows, you have Linux, you have the Mac, Apple, all that. So not to mention smartphone operating systems and tablets operating systems and all that. And sometimes we just aren't, we don't have the ability to properly monitor those. So we want to make sure we're using tools that can do that. Another is ensuring uniformity in user permission, making sure that we are operating by the concept of least privilege, meaning we give out the least amount of rights, but still allow users to do their job, and not just give admin rights out to people all the time. This is very dangerous, of course. Unofficial and unsanctioned IT practices, that's called shadow IT. So this is where you get into where users just kind of take matters into their own hands instead of going through IT and doing the proper IT procedures. For example, let's say you have a user that doesn't like OneDrive, and that's how our company stores its files. And the user would like to use Dropbox. So the user goes and they set up a personal Dropbox account, and the next thing you know, they are storing company files in their personal Dropbox account because they just don't like OneDrive. So that is something we'd have to consider. That's shadow IT. Or another example would be a user backing up their company data onto a personal USB drive. So there are ways to prevent all of that from happening. There are ways to prevent users from being able to use Dropbox for company files. There's a way to prevent the use of USB flash drives on operating systems. And we need to put those types of methods into practice. The last we have here is crafting and managing applications with robust security. So this gets into DevOps and all that. That would be development operations and understanding the security behind that. Of course, I'm not diving into DevOps here really, but if you are a company that's making applications, you would want to be familiar with all of that. Then we've got multi-cloud security best practices. So there are some best practices here to consider with all this. First would be to understand common attack strategies to choose effective security solutions that prevent breach. In other words, be familiar with the latest and greatest types of threats that are out there. And you're going to find when you start playing around in the Microsoft dashboards and all that, Microsoft will periodically post about these latest and greatest threats, so we can be familiar about them. The next is streamlining updates and have ways to automate updates. The next, we have merge threat management and response to automate defenses. So putting in procedures that can help with the automation of threat management and response. And you'll find that Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft Defender are well suited for this as you go through. Aim for security, unified security measures. In other words, use unification. Try to unify things, and that's really what Microsoft is trying to do with a lot of their security products with SIEM and SOAR, Microsoft Defender, and Sentinel and all that. Bring it all together into a unified method of security. And then you've got consolidate controls. In other words, try to consider, if you're in a multi-cloud environment, the good news is a lot of the cloud environments will link together for security. And you could have, for example, I could have Azure as sort of like the main cloud for our company, and AWS, Google Cloud, whatever it is, can send all of its stuff to be checked through Azure if you want it. Adopt least privilege. So you might have heard me talk about that again a moment ago, which is using the least amount of privileges, giving out the least amount of privileges, but still allowing somebody to do their job. Leverage Cloud Security Posture Management, CSPM. So these gets into security posture tools. That means utilizing these tools to help improve your security posture. Minimize network duplication to limit breach points. That gets into having duplication of network and assets, having duplicates of those. Get rid of those. And lastly is to embed security in DevOps with tools like Microsoft Defender to proactively fix vulnerabilities and enforce policies. So again, utilizing tools in regards to things like DevOps. If you're doing development operations, developing applications and all that, you want to be using the tools that are available. And again, I'm not diving into those here, but if that is something your company is dealing with, that's something you would want to familiarize yourself with. All right. So that is hopefully going to give you now a better understanding of, without diving into the tools just yet, but at least now you've got a bit of an understanding, if you didn't already, of securing hybrid and multi-cloud environments.
I'd now like to spend some time talking about the organizational requirements when it comes to auditing in the Microsoft 365 Purview environment. So it's pretty common that companies occasionally are going to want to audit what's going on in their environment, and Microsoft gives us a couple of different solutions for that as far as the amount of features we get, and that's done by the licensing of auditing. So we have a standard and we have a premium. Auditing is going to be dealt with by going to portal.microsoft.com, show all, and then clicking compliance. That'll bring us over into Microsoft Purview, and then we would click auditing. But really the point of this video is to talk about the differences between the licensing and all of that we have with standard and premium. Now if you go to Google or Bing and do a quick search on these keywords, auditing in Purview, you'll come across an article like this right here, auditing solutions in Microsoft Purview. So we're going to go there. We're going to analyze the differences here. So you have standard and you have premium. Now before I get into the details, let's look at the licensing capabilities of that. So if we go down, the standard auditing license is given with these subscriptions right here. So any of these that you see here, Microsoft 365 E3, so you'll notice a lot of 3s here, right? And then F1 or F5, but mainly what you want to be thinking about is the E3 license is the main one that you get. So Office 365 E3 or Microsoft 365 E3, any of those, also the business premiums, but from an enterprise perspective, we want to be thinking about E3, and that's what I would really focus on if I were you. The premium, if we go to this link right here, you'll find that it's all about 5. So E5, Office 365, E5, all of that, that's what's going to give us the premium. Okay, so let's go back. Now let's talk about the features and capabilities. So audit standard, you'll notice at standard they tell you this is just going to be enabled by default. Your organization will get standard just right out of the gates. If you are able to get into Purview, you'll at least have standard. Okay, thousands of searchable audit events. They have tons and tons of audit events available for you right out of the gates to do searching. Okay. You have the audit search tool in the Purview compliance portal, but you also have a PowerShell commandlet, search-unified audit log, that'll let you perform PowerShell capabilities with this. And then you can also export to CSV files. So all the data that's grabbed within auditing can be exported to a spreadsheet, essentially. You'll have access to the audit logs, the Office 365 Management API. Developers can integrate with this if they're writing applications for it, and there's a 90-day audit retention that you get. So 90 days, your audit log events will be kept. All right. Now, when you get to premium, you can create what are called audit log retention policies, and this is going to allow you for longer retention of your audit logs. Basically, you can go beyond that 90 days because you can create retention policies that will extend it for a maximum of 10 years. Okay. You also get Audit Premium Intelligent Insights, so they provide insights that can help you with conducting forensics investigations and things like that. You have more capabilities for searching through Exchange Online and SharePoint. So definitely a better solution. And then another big deal is you get higher bandwidth capabilities with this. So Audit Premium is going to provide faster and higher bandwidth capabilities when it comes to doing your searches. They have a nice little table here that also sort of just breaks it all down for you, the features you get. So here's everything you get with Standard. All right, and then you can see with Premium, you get the 1-year audit log retention right out of the gates, 10-year audit log retention max, audit log retention policies, which you do have to activate if you want to extend that, and then the intelligent insights. Okay, so if you're dealing with a company or organization that is interested in auditing, the first question you really need to know here is, well, first off, what license do they already have? Do they have something like Microsoft 365 E3? Do they have E5? You'll already know what they've got. And then the other question, though, would be if they needed to upgrade to Premium, it would all boil down to if they wanted these extra features right here. So just be aware of these extra features. If a company or organization needed these extra capabilities and features, then you can move into that. All right. A lot of your companies out there will get by just fine with these features here, but having these extra capabilities and features is going to benefit some companies. All right. Well, hopefully that now helps you understand and compare the difference between auditing Standard and auditing Premium. Let's talk now about getting auditing enabled and having the right permissions. So there's a couple things you need to know when it comes to that. First thing is we'll start here on portal.microsoft.com. We'll click Show All, and we're going to go to Compliance. That's going to bring us into Purview. And once we get in there, the first thing to be aware of is rights. So we're going to go down here under Roles and Scopes, and we're going to go to Permissions. And to give somebody the authority to deal with auditing, we're going to go right up under where it says Microsoft Purview Solutions and then Roles. And then we're going to look for the Auditing Manager, Audit Manager. So we'll go there. Okay, we'll select that role. So this is going to be the role that we're going to want to consider when it comes to auditing. If you look at the rights that role has, roles in this role group have audit log capability permissions and view audit log capability permissions. All right, so that's exactly what we're wanting in terms of rights and all that. So if we click on edit there, you can click on choose users or choose groups. We'll click choose user, and I'll just add myself here, John Christopher. And that's how I would, give myself permissions there for working with auditing. Okay, the next thing to be aware of when it comes to auditing is if I go right over here to audit, now if this is the first time, you're going to have a big button on the screen that says something like Start Recording Users and Admin Activity. Now you can see I've already done that. But if this is your first time being here, that's how you're going to enable auditing, okay? If you see this screen, then auditing has already been turned on for you. But if not, if you have a big button, in fact, there's let's see, turn on auditing Microsoft 365. I might be able to show you a picture of it. If we go here to this little article, turn on auditing. If we scroll down there you go. There's a screenshot of what it would look like. Keep in mind they change things all the time, so it could look a little different now. The other thing is there is a PowerShell command you can run. You could run this command to verify that it's already turned on. So it tells you a message is displayed saying that it may take 60 minutes. So this is turning it on. I'm sorry, but you can do a get-admin audit log config, and you could see if it's turned on. This is a way you would do it through PowerShell. Set-admin audit log config. Unified audit log ingestion enabled $true. That would turn it on. Okay, but you'd have to be connected to the Exchange Online PowerShell, because Exchange Online was originally what was the driving engine when it comes to auditing in Microsoft 365. Okay, so anyway, that is how you would turn that on. Keep in mind to do auditing and all that, don't forget we still have to have a license and all that associated with it to the users that we're auditing have to have a license, like a Microsoft 365 E3, E5, depending upon if you're doing like standard or premium or whatever. But you do have to turn it on. It does take time to turn on, and even when you do turn it on, it can take time before you'll actually ever start seeing any results. I now want to take a look at Microsoft's unified audit capabilities in Microsoft Purview. So you can use this to investigate the things that are going on in your environment. And so we're going to take a look. So here we are on portal.microsoft.com. We're going to click Show All and then go down to Compliance. That'll bring us into Microsoft Purview. And from there, we're going to go over here to the left-hand side and click Audit. All right, once we get into Audit, this is where we could start looking for the various activities that are going on. We can choose a starting and ending date range and time range if we want. We can choose the activities that we want to look at. So we'll go right here where it says choose activities. You have lots and lots and lots of activities that you could look at. Let's say I was wanting to kind of focus on email. I could do email, put in the keyword email, and you can kind of scroll down and you could see the various things involving the keyword email. If you wanted to like focus in on maybe the word exchange, all right. So this would get into maybe like if somebody was administering exchange in your environment, like a fellow admin. So you have all kinds of stuff here. Lots of different items that could be looked at. We can select the stuff that we want. So if we want multiple items that we want to look at, all right, we can do that. Lots and lots of things here we can select. Conditions we can select that we want to search for. We can also look for specific users, like for example, if I wanted to point out myself, jc@examlabpractice.com, I can specify files, folders, sites, and then other workload related to Microsoft 365. So all these other items that we want to focus on for searching. Okay, you can search based on keywords. So if you were searching for a specific keyword, you could put in that. So maybe if it involved Microsoft Exchange and it involved a specific department, you could put in a department name as a keyword. You've got record types that you want to look for, specific record types. All right, lots of different options there. This is just going to filter it a little bit more. You've got administrative units. If you have administrative units in your environment, you can search based on that. All right, and you can give the search a name if you want. Once that's done, you're just going to click search and it's going to start searching. Now, let me warn you that this can take a long time to happen. Okay, in a very large environment, this could take a very long time. Now, if you have premium, it's going to happen faster than if you don't. But this can take a long time. Now, in a small environment, you're looking at maybe less than 10 minutes. Okay, maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes. All right. Now, I've already done some queries ahead of time so that we can just jump right in and look at them. So I've basically done a query here. We'll jump down here where it says completed. I'll open this query up. All right. And you can see that this query is based on copying mailbox logon info, send on behalf. This is all email related, exchange related, very similar to what I just selected. And you can look at the information. You can see the date, you can see the IP address, the user that's involved, the record type, the activity that was involved here. Okay, items that were involved, if there was any administrative units involved. This was basically a user checking email. That would have been me checking my email. IPv6, IPv4 IP addresses. Okay. And so from there you can click that. You can see other additional pieces of information here. Creation time, the operation that was utilized. In other words, the permission that was utilized. All right. There's again the client IP address. Lots of information. The logon user SID, the security identifier, the mailbox information. All right. Lots of data here, even some JSON, JavaScript object notation, that data that it generates is listed out here. Okay. Now, as always as well, you know, when it comes to this, you can download You can export and download, and I've already exported, but I can download the file right here, and if I want to open that up in Microsoft Excel, I can do that. All right, and I've got a little report here, and of course once it's in Excel you can kind of organize it any way you want. All right, so pretty easy, pretty straightforward, definitely something you can check out. Again, just let me warn you that it does take some time. If you have just enabled auditing, it can take some time before you're actually going to get any real results. Okay, but you can generate activities like, for me, I did the Exchange keyword search, and then I had already gone into email and checked email and all that, so it generated some audit results. But my recommendation in the real world also, though, involves, if you're trying to look for a specific thing, like maybe you're trying to analyze a user who has accessed a file or deleted a file, you should test that out yourself. You should create a file in the Microsoft environment, try deleting it or modifying it or accessing it or whatever it is, and then see if you show up on the audit log. Give that some time to make sure that goes through, and then you should be able to go through and you would be ready in the real environment for this type of thing to happen. I want to spend some time now talking about using advanced hunting techniques with the help of KQL, which is called Kusto Query Language. So let's take a look at that together now. Here we are on portal.microsoft.com. If we click Show All and then go to the Security Blade, that's going to bring us into Microsoft Defender. And then we're going to drop down right here where it says Hunting, and we're going to click on Advanced Hunting. This is going to bring us into where we can perform Kusto Query Language queries here in the Microsoft 365 Defender environment. Now, the first thing we'll notice here is we're on a tab called Schema, and then below there you're going to see these various tables. This is actually, if you think about it, in Microsoft 365 Defender, what's happening is it's able to collect information from all the various sources in Azure. So that's Azure, and that's Microsoft 365. That involves Microsoft 365 for identity. It involves Microsoft 365 Defender for endpoint, Defender for cloud apps, all the various versions of Microsoft 365 Defender all rolled into one. It goes into these various tables. And of course, it's nice that Microsoft gives us these graphical dashboards and all that show us things in an easy to use manner. But what happens in a situation where you're not able to find the exact information you're looking for because Microsoft doesn't provide it in their graphical dashboards? Well, that's where the Kusto Query Language comes in. That's where it's going to help us. Now, you don't have to be a grandmaster guru or expert on KQL for what we're doing here. But there is some basic fundamental things I want to look at, help you understand, and you can also go deeper into this if you want. The first thing I'll show you is that if you go out to Google or Bing and just do a quick search on Microsoft KQL, you're going to come across this link right here. If we go into that, Microsoft gives us a nice little overview of the Kusto Query Language, and they talk about the basics of it, and they give some examples. And you can also go and take a look at their syntax articles over here, where they break down the syntax and help you understand the different operators and filters and all of that. But I'm gonna show you some of the basics there, things to be aware of. We'll run a few queries, we'll get a good foundation of it, and then if you want to dig deeper into it, you can. Okay. Also, you can do a Google or Bing search on Kusto Query Language just for Defender, and they've got a few references on that as well. But let's jump back over in here, and the first thing I want to show you is, again, these are your various tables you can look at, right? So I can go through here if I want, and I can go to these various tables, and then I can run a query. They've even got right here, if I look, some basic queries that we can see for examples, like this one called top. If I double click on this, you'll see that it just throws up a quick query that we could perform regarding that. There we go. Actually, I think I had a query already. Yeah, there we go. So then I could run that query if I want and get a quick response if there is any data. And this is actually searching the Cloud Apps events table. So I don't have any events in Cloud Apps right now, but you can see that it says where the timestamp is greater than 1 day ago, essentially. And then it's going to sort that data. So the important thing to understand here is that, let me just go a little below here. What you've got is you've got your data source, okay? And then below that you have a pipe symbol. Now the pipe symbol means that you want to use all the current rows in this command. And if you're not familiar with pipelining, pipelining is a thing that we've had with commands for decades and decades. And the idea is you want to think of a command is, okay, I want to perform this, I want to grab this information, and then the contents of the information that I grab are going to go down this pipeline, right? And so this little symbol is the pipe symbol. And then whatever comes after this pipe symbol means I want to perform some kind of action against the information that's in the pipeline. And this action can be a filter, or it can be a modifier of some kind. It's going to modify the data, or it can be a limiter, which means, hey, I want to limit a certain amount of data. And this can happen, you can have lots of these, and the end result when you get to the end of the pipeline is going to be what happens. You're going to get the output. So if you look at our example that we've got right here, you can see that the table we're looking at is the Cloud Events table, Cloud App Events table. And so that basically means, hey, I want you to, and if you just told it to hit the Cloud Events table by itself, you're just basically saying grab everything. The problem is you could be grabbing, in a large environment especially, you could be grabbing so much information. You need to filter that. So you're grabbing the data, and then you're saying, okay, in this pipeline, I want to say where the timestamp is greater than, and that you're saying ago, and then in parentheses, that's actually performing what's called a method, which means I want to look at a certain time period ago, in this case 1 day. 1D means 1 day. So you're grabbing the data, you're performing this action first, and then the output that would generate is going to go to the next part of the pipeline, which says top 10, show me the top 10, and then I want to sort this by timestamp and then description. So that essentially is what you're doing there, okay? You're grabbing all that information, all right? So now if I wanted to see device info, like let's say I wanted to look at device logon events, I could say device logon events, right? So I've got a device logon events table, and just, by itself, I could just run that, and you're just saying grab everything. So you can see that we've now grabbed everything regarding device logon events. In my case, I've got an NYCCL1 machine that I've played around with, and a test machine that I've played around with. All right. So imagine though, if you did this in a very large environment, you had thousands of events. I mean, you could even be hundreds of thousands of events. This could take forever. As you can see, it didn't take long. Here's the latency right here. But this could take forever. Now, one thing you can do is if you wanted to see, how many entries we've got there, we could say count. All right. Pipe that over to count, and then run that query, and it's just going to return a count. In most queries, though, the good news is when you run it, it will actually list the count right here. But if you can imagine if you had hundreds of thousands of events, it would take forever to display all this. If you just put pipe count, you could display how many events very quickly without it loading all the events up on the screen. So that's why that's going to be valuable to you. Okay. The other thing I'll say that's you'll sometimes use when you're working with this is sometimes you'll declare variables. You'll have variables that you'll display. Like a variable is a keyword that's going to store some information up in memory, and then it can be displayed when you want it to. Like I could do that right now. the command to store a variable is the let command. So I could say let, and we'll just say, I'll call the variable some word. So some word is our variable, and we're going to say equals, and then what word do we want to put in there? I'll say John Christopher. Okay. Whenever you declare a variable with the Kusto query language, you end that with a semicolon. And then if I wanted to display that variable, I could say print, and I'll say some word, and then I'm just going to run that query, and it's just going to display my name. So when you're writing queries, if you needed to put some kind of variable in there, you could do that. And I'll show you another example of that, a more sophisticated example of that here in just a moment. Okay. Let's say I wanted to look at device registry events on my devices. So, of course, don't forget you could search. So if you wanted to search for device registry, you could find the table and all that. So that's the other thing is I already know what some of these tables are, but if you wanted to keyword search them, you could. So again, I could say device registry. Let's say device registry if I was trying to find a specific one. So there it is right there. Double click on that. It's going to type it in here. So that's going to be our table. And then I'm going to say, well, if we just play that, we just run that query, it's going to grab a lot of information. Again, we got 5,657 items. That's not too bad, but in a very large environment, this thing could be collecting insane amounts of data. And it's actually, in my case, doing this from a machine called Test Machine 3, which is a Windows 11 machine. But now watch this. I'm going to say take, so pipe, I'm going to say take 100, all right? And then what we'll do, if we just say take 100 and play that, all right, we'll go ahead and run that query. You can see it just displays 100, right? But now what we'll do is we're going to say, let's do this. Let's say sort by, and you can see it gives you some IntelliSense here. We'll say timestamp, and then the timestamp will be based on the description. And it takes some playing around with this to learn this. This is why it's important to practice this and maybe read through some of those articles that I just showed you. But I'm going to go ahead and run the query. And now you can see that it's displayed the first 100, and it's actually sorted by timestamp that's pulled from the description. Okay. All right. So we got, let's do device info. Let's see what we get. So if we do device info and we just run a query against the device info table, what do we get? All right, so I get 59 items, and it shows me device info, and here's all this data, right? And I may not need all of that data. So another thing I can do is I can use a command called project. But let's say take 100, okay, and we'll say project, and that means only show me. I only want to see the device. Let's do device ID, and we'll say you can do comma, and then you can do device, we'll say name, comma, and then we'll say OS platform. All right, and that'll be our query. So let's go ahead and run that, and there you go. See, it's only displaying that. So see how beneficial that is, how helpful that could be to us. All right. So you can really get down and dirty with this. You can pull, get lots of information on this. If I wanted to see logon events, I don't think I've probably generated any identity logon events yet. Let's just see. But I want to show you something that could come in handy in a production environment. Let's see how many, yeah. So I haven't got any real logon events yet. And the reason I don't is because I don't have the auditing logon events capability because I'm not set up in a domain. But if you were in a domain, if your machines were in a domain, you would actually get this. So, but I want to show you a couple of things with this. First off, if I wanted to, I could say, identity logon events, and I can join data together. So I can say join kind equals enter, and then I'll say identity info. All right, and I'm going to say on object ID. Okay, so I'm basically saying I want to pull identity info inside of the account object ID. So it's going to show me identity logon events data, but it's going to pull identity info for that data and then the account object ID and display that on the screen. Again, I don't have any logon events to show, but I wanted to show that I could do that. Now watch this. I could also say identity logon events where timestamp is greater than ago 1 hour, and that would show me events that have happened in the past hour, which of course we know is none, right? But the main thing to get here is some of this is trial and error. Go out there, do some Google or Bing searching, and you'll be surprised the kind of stuff you'll find. Also, I'll tell you that ChatGPT is also very fantastic at helping with this. You can actually go into ChatGPT and you can ask it. You can say, I want some specific data in Microsoft Defender. Write me a KQL query that would help me. So I want to encourage you to try that out as well. If you have access to ChatGPT, you can write queries that way as well. But ultimately, definitely you want to skim through some of their query syntax, get some practice in with it. You don't have to be a Grandmaster Guru or KQL for what we're doing here, but practice with a little bit, get some hands-on experience, and you'll be fine. Hey, this is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed getting to experience a little bit of this course, and I hope you'll join me on the full adventure. If you'll check the description of this video, you'll see a link that'll show you how you can get access to the full course. Now, in the full course, you're going to learn how to set up a practice environment where you can practice hands-on, and I'm going to provide you with lots of virtual simulations that you can do 24/7. All you need is a web browser. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll also give me a like and subscribe. I'm trying very, very hard to get this channel to build and grow, and so I hope you'll take the time to do that.